So this is just a very free-form discussion with myself and my great friend Fen de Villiers here about the essay by Alexander Adams. It's called The New Impressionists, or How to Start a Distant Art Movement. And you can find this on Alexander Adams' Substack. I'll link it in the description or whatever. So first paragraph here. When the movement we recognise under the name the Impressionists first exhibited together, they called their 1874 exhibition Société Anonyme Coopérative des Artistes Peintres Sculpteurs Graveurs, Cooperative and Anonymous Association of Painters, Sculptors and Engravers, held at Nadars Photographic Studio in Paris. They gave themselves no title, agreed to no core principles, signed no manifesto. They came together in a common cause in rejection of the Académie and opposition to hanging jury of the annual Salon, where France's most talented professional artists exhibited, sold and were awarded prizes. Many of the exhibitors and at the subsequent exhibitions had been rejected by the Académie and the Salon juries, but some had not. It was Degas who insisted artists choose. Henceforth they could exhibit as independents or choose the Salon. They could not do both. In one respect, the motivation for the series of annual exhibitions was pragmatic or prosaic. A group of artists wanted to exhibit and sell art that the official channels blocked. They wanted to advance their careers and earn money. Discrediting the state bodies was secondary. For some, perhaps it was not their intention at all. It was just simply an inference that others made. So there's a lot to think about here, obviously. Like, I don't know how much you know about the Impressionists, about the history of that movement thing, because I'm limited to basically having read like a biography of Monet, really.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I haven't read a great deal. Of course, I understand, and I know there was a lot of issues related to the Academy, and of course, their style and their approach was not considered Academy fit. So there was considerable, I think I can sort of understand at a time when you had a very academic understanding. The juries in these academies and these certain salons only allowed a certain type of academic art.
And it was heavily gatekept. Basically, that's what I think Adams is getting at here. That these people came together, and they say no title, no core principles, no manifesto, but they all came together in rejection of the Academy, which I think you can draw a lot of parallels between what we're doing at the moment and this, in the sense that we don't really have, core principles is kind of hard to define and stuff. You made a manifesto which was very good and it was very succinct, but that was more of a kind of an additional art piece for your breakthrough exhibition, right?
Well, it was my it was my Mishima moment in the sense that I wanted to put out a manifesto in the hope to find like-minded individuals at my exhibition.
Because we associate a lot of these movements with having, a group of people comes together and they all agree on things and they're all kind of aligned.
Yes.
At least that's the way it's framed in retrospect. And then they make a manifesto. They all get together and they make this manifesto, like the Futurists or whatever. And then they make art that corresponds to the doctrines of the manifesto. But that's a very 20th century kind of. That's a very 20th century kind of idea. Like every ism and ist has a manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important to note is that the current contemporary art scene at the time that I was putting that manifesto out, and this is quite a broadly held view, is they find manifestos, they kind of tease and make fun of manifestos, because of course to have a manifesto is to be a serious individual. It's not someone
you can't be ironic. Although I suppose they've probably made some ironic manifestos, haven't they? Like poking fun at the idea of that.
They've these sort of have these overly ironic, silly kind of
because like Luke Turner or whatever, he tried to do that. Sorry to diverge there, but you know that there's that ridiculous fellow Luke Turner with his meta-modernist manifesto.
Meta-modernist.
Yeah, so he made meta-modernism, which isn't really anything to do with actual art. Like nobody actually does art in this. It's just kind of like a wank fest.
Yes.
Like they had these points in the meta-modernism manifesto, like. We recognise oscillation to be the natural order of the world. We must liberate ourselves from inertia resulting from a century of modernist ideological naivety and cynical insincerity of its anonymous bastard child. Anyway, that's his own thing. But he tried to do a manifesto, and it was it's when it's one guy who kind of puts down a manifesto, it's a bit hard for it to be taken as seriously as if it's like a concerted group of people.
Yeah, indeed. It's. I mean,
But you had the work
it's
actually. You already had the work that was corresponding to the manifesto anyway.
well, essentially, the manifesto was basically already written in the work, essentially years or months before.
Yeah, you were just putting it into writing what you already
I
were
was putting it
making
in.
in the
Yeah,
studio.
I was putting into writing already what I was feeling and what was like kind of resonating intuitively through me, and what I was experiencing in the art world and the culture around me.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, the whole thing of like writing a manifesto. It's seen as too serious today, and of course, to be too serious today, you are immediately attacked. But I think in this time of irony, to be serious is pretty revolutionary,
Yeah,
actually.
and some
You
people
know,
are self-aware about this. Again, Luke Turner, he tried to be self-aware about the fact that irony has kind of gone too far, and irony, as
yeah,
David Foster Wallace said, is the
it's
song of
corrosive. Yes,
a bird that has come to love its cage. So they kind of been imprisoned by their own, inability to be serious and be sensitive and emotional about things.
absolutely, absolutely. It was. I think it's very corrosive, actually. You know, to constantly live under this state of irony is
Yeah,
also. I mean, we've discussed this before. This concept of, you know, you also hide behind irony. It's like anything that you say or do, you can just say, "Ah, well, I didn't really mean it," and I'm just kind of like a
yeah.
jokey, laughy kind of person. But actually,
It
you're
was
super
merely an act.
insecure.
I was merely trolling.
Yeah,
Like no, you
yeah,
just said
yeah,
something
exactly.
very retarded.
Yeah,
Anyway, sorry. Yeah. So this is just interesting in the sense that many of the exhibitors at the subsequent exhibitions they had been rejected by the Academy and the Salon juries.
yes,
We don't really have necessarily a parallel to this, apart from maybe some of your experiences in Antwerp with the art scene there, where they've refused to give
sure.
you a look in the door of an exhibition or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, essentially, this this level of gatekeepership is done on a very subtle level. Some of it is kind of quite in your face, but the stuff that I've experienced is simply just interviews that were going to happen and then they were cancelled.
Yeah.
Group shows that were potentially going to happen and then you're like excluded. Certain setups or things where you basically should have gotten in, but you were very quickly sort of pushed to the side simply because your work, your philosophy, and your ideas center around that work is not fit for today's age. So, I mean, I can understand what they were probably experiencing, the Impressionists were experiencing back in that time, and it's rather frustrating. You need to find your niche, you need to find your
Yes.
people, but how do you find your people if you're never given a platform? That's the thing.
And this is the idea of this institution being so ossified and kind of fossilized that it doesn't really have the brain to accommodate newness. And newness doesn't necessarily mean something that's
No.
shocking and avant-garde. It just means something that's different. They abhor anything that could potentially undermine their kind of position.
the the idea of like an arts culture is that it's organic, and so you have different artists and writers and people and thinkers who are there who are organically riffing off one another.
Yeah. And if
But
you
if you
try and
have
squash that,
yeah,
you end
if
up
if
with it's just you're just trapped, aren't you?
you and essentially that's what's happened with contemporary art now. They've backed themselves into a corner, and they have to now sort of really defend this tight clique circle from any of our ideas and any of the sort of work that we're making from the outside. Of course, the stuff that we embody in our work or the stuff that we stand for is ultimately extremely corrosive to to some of the things that they're trying to hold on to. So, I mean, if you see, you can kind of see it from their point of view too. They're like, well, damn, we don't want this kind of
Yeah,
art
we don't
coming in
want
or
a
this kind of
rival
culture.
or an alternative, and we don't want people to see even that there could be an alternative,
Indeed,
because
indeed,
that's when it
that's it.
starts to have a snowball effect, and people actually start getting ideas.
Absolutely,
You don't want people getting ideas, because yeah, they,
exactly.
they have a very fossilized view of this is now art. Anything can be art. This is art, but at the same time, it also has to be lurid. It has to be kind of like it has to be identity based. It has to have this kind of like gross quality to it. And then other
Yes,
things are
yes.
essentially like like you said, they're gate kept from this.
Well, it's this idea of anything can be art as long as it's what we say it is,
And this is
which
his,
is which
yeah,
is extraordinary, really.
yeah.
It's just, I mean, it. These people are horrendous hypocrites, really.
And that leads us to this, obviously, where they say the motivation for the exhibitions was pragmatic or prosaic. So they wanted to exhibit and sell art that official channels blocked. And the very nature of the fact that they are blocking what you would consider to be official channels and things,
Yeah.
is the actual thing that enables us to gain our energy. That's where it actually comes from. Because otherwise, if we were kind of given a free ride, and I was showing at the Royal Academy or whatever, or you were showing at Antwerp, the big stage or whatever, then we wouldn't necessarily need to feel like you grow fat on your own kind of success or your own complacency. And I think that they definitely have grown quite fat and quite lazy.
Oh God, yeah, lazy being the key word there. I mean, just if you see what they pass as culture these days, I mean, it's just it's horrendous.
They've lost the root and the real joy of the craft as well, and that's kind of what they're, I think, a bit worried about when things start
Yeah.
appearing where people are actually relishing things that are the very base things like drawing, and actual, and not drawing in a kind of a stilted classical realist way or
No,
whatever, but
indeed.
real drawing with real verve, and obviously you're
Absolutely.
working with real physical materials in a way which actually has something that punches them in the face.
Indeed.
But yeah,
Indeed.
on a
Yeah.
sense that we are pragmatic in the sense that we've been this is the path we just have to take, really. And you want to exhibit and sell art. You want to make a living, and you want to, that's the path we're forced to forge.
I suppose just one small note here is I think a number of years ago when I was considerably younger, I had more of a naive view on this. I had this idea that I could become a sculptor and I could just work my way through different galleries and different avenues, and I would be able to push a certain type of art that I felt was important and vital, and it would just connect to people, and you just kind of
yeah.
you kind of go from one position to another, and you just, as long as you put in the hard work, as long as you're so passionate and loving what you do,
It's this idea of
you
meritocracy.
continue
It's
to,
a delusion of I will win through just on the pure merit of my spirit and my willingness to do good work. But it's again
exactly, and
it's not how
and
it's
and
functions.
and you would think that that's how culture would essentially function. This idea that, well, look, if you're just absolutely honing your craft and your ideas and your ability and you're pushing yourself, then why would you stand in the way of someone doing that? But that's exactly what is happening today. That is exactly what's happening.
But that's the idea. I think when you're young, when you're in your early 20s, you can't really reckon with this idea of raw power, and you don't understand like why people
No.
would have power, why they would hold power at all costs, and why how good it feels. Because when you're a young man, you don't have money, you don't have power, you barely have anything really. You have
Indeed.
spunk and vinegar or whatever, and
Indeed.
that's all you have. You're kind of tough and ready to go. But at the same time, you can't really get yourself into the mindset of why somebody would potentially shut you out or hold on to their position at your
Indeed.
expense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it very, very quickly it started to dawn on me, actually, just how controlled all of this is from the media channels, from the political standpoint, from the philosophical standpoint, from the very tight knit and niche philosophical aspect of what's allowed,
Yeah.
what's allowed to be expressed, and just how kind of just a sense of absolute blind faith in that they have it and it must be this way and it has to be this way, and yeah, I mean of course I'm very aware of it now, but
That's
I
very
think,
interesting that you. Sorry, that is interesting. It reminds me of some things that Daniel says. Our friend Daniel Suarez. He says that when you're in the world of contemporary art, they do frame it in the way that this is the only way you could ever make anything, and they will sneer at you, and
yes,
they'll look if you go and you say, "Oh, I actually enjoyed Rubens the other day." They'll make some snarky remark about how Rubens was a pornographer or a voyeuristic, misogynist or some whatever nonsense. But they don't actually
yes,
understand anything about it. They're kind of a bit
yeah,
afraid of it. They've been told that that there's something off about it, and it's old hat
yes,
or whatever. But they just
yes.
want to keep you in there really because misery
Well,
loves company.
Well, it's wonderful you bring that up, actually, because that idea, actually, that you're talking about is something that I've noticed very much. I mean, just inspiring on the early modernists, the first thing you'll hear is, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be inspiring on that, or you shouldn't be making this work. It's colonial." It's that magic word,
Yeah.
that magic word that always comes up.
It's a lot of buzzwords thrown around. So yeah, they wanted to advance their careers and earn money. We all do,
Yes,
obviously, want to
absolutely.
do that.
Of course, you'd want to do that if it's something you love. You want to find your audience. You don't want to
Yes,
be
yeah,
gate kept.
yeah. Discrediting the state bodies was secondary. For some, perhaps it was not their intention at all, just simply an inference that others made, which is again something that Alexander Adams he's obviously drawn parallels between us and that as well. A lot of
Yes,
Alexander Adams'
yes,
work itself, it has some powerful polemics against the state bodies, and again, he wrote a whole little pamphlet called "Abolish
yes,
the Arts Council,"
indeed.
and his book "Iconoclasm and Artivism," and they all touch on these
I've
things.
read I've read a number of his books now, and they are absolutely stellar jobs to pick apart just all the kind of mechanics of this cultural system, how it
Yeah,
runs, how it works, how it how all the strings pull the the puppets. It's an extra. I mean, I'd recommend anyone to read them. They do lay out all of this stuff very well in considerable detail, and it's rather frightening actually when you just see how all of this stuff is pushed from the institutions to the higher levels to the lower levels,
yeah.
from the small gallery spaces to the large gallery spaces. I mean, it's just extraordinary. It's an amazing machine how it operates.
And in order to discredit something like that, you do have to go into the inner workings, and you have to follow the money, and you have to find out who is pushing this sort of thing.
Yes,
But that is not enough. That's part of it, but that's also, you can't just do that. That's what a lot of these
no,
culture warriors they fall down on, where they'll write some
so
very
true.
elaborate stuff about this is where money comes from, and these funds these NGOs and these leftist organisations or whatever. But they're
Yes,
not really promoting an alternative that money will flow into from our side or the other side.
so true.
You
No,
know,
it's so true. It's that thing of you can diagnose the problem, and you can see where the sickness is, but there is no antidote
yeah,
administered.
yeah.
You know,
Because not enough. I simply believe it's a case of not enough man hours spent on actually creating an alternative or creating an antidote. And it starts
absolutely.
very small. I will say this again and again. It starts very, very small. It starts with one man making a little, getting a couple of his friends together,
Yes.
and they're getting a close knit thing going on. You don't want a mass movement of people. That's something that happens later down the line, if at all. You need people you can trust, and I think a lot of in the case of the Impressionists, however, they were all very much engaged with each other. Some of them very mercurial personalities and quite out there personalities. But you had
Yes.
an interesting range of people. You had, I think Adams touched on this in a second here with the next paragraph, but we've got a very interesting range of people. We've got a nice variety of people, and I think that's always key to have people who are different stages of their lives. Like someone like I believe it was Corot or Pissarro. He was older than the other Impressionists, and you had a kind of people looking up to one another. Same with the Pre-Raphaelites. You had Burne-Jones or whatever. He was a lot younger, and he looked up to the original Pre-Raphaelites like Rossetti and Millet. So
Indeed.
you've got to have a kind of a dynamic of age in there. You've got to have a dynamic of, obviously different types of thoughts, different, let's go on the next paragraph because he
Yes.
touched on this.
Yes.
Anyway.
Fire away.
So when one examines the list of exhibitors at the independent exhibitions of 1874 to 86, one is struck by the indisputable heterogeneity of styles, attitudes, and schools. So very different, varying work. There are some artists who were conventional to a T, including some sculptors of portrait busts. Some were quite established, ages spanned from the young to the elderly. While all were competent, not all were original or distinguished and have lapsed into deserved obscurity. Yet, in retrospect, we separate and elevate those that we call the Impressionists because of their unfinished surfaces, rejecting the glassy varnished surfaces of the salon painters, their proclivity towards a non-narrative tendency to work plein air, painting on light grounds, committing to realism above idealism, and centering the petit bourgeois and working class people as subjects for art. These shared aspects make the Impressionists stand out and retrospectively form the style of a school. The process of evolution, or at least change, was so accelerated at the time that the last exhibitions included such artists such as Gauguin and Seurat, who are classified as neo-impressionists or post-impressionists. The second generation of impressionists who have developed significantly enough to be classed as the successors to the exhibitions of an older generation who started the independent exhibitions. So yeah, so any thoughts on that, man? I mean, that's pretty much just what we said. There's a wide variety of people.
Yeah, I mean it's well not a huge amount. I mean, yeah, I mean wide variety of people. I think it's good. I think it's important to understand also this idea of the neo-impressionists. This passing on of the fire, passing on of the, you have a kind of an early startup of certain raw ideas that gets the
Yeah,
energy going, and then it passes on to, the next band, the next
yeah.
group
That's always
who,
tremendously inspiring to me, man. Like I'm always bowled over when anybody says that, oh, your drawings inspired me to create any kind of work or anything like that. Even if it's just a young fellow on Telegram or something like that.
yeah, I mean
Has that happened
that's.
to you in at all in the last few years?
Oh yeah, no, it's happened. It's happened a lot. I mean, it is really touching to see that I can over all these years just working in solitude in my atelier. The stuff that I've produced then goes on to inspire others, and I love getting the emails
Yeah.
sent to me where someone says, "Hey, I've never made any work before, but I've just started after seeing what you're doing," and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's the magic. That's really the magic of creation. That you can, it's, as you mentioned before, it's like you start a small fire,
Yeah,
and
and then people
that
gather
then,
around, and then
yeah,
they learn how to make their own fires, and then before you know it, you've
yes.
got civilization going on.
This is, yeah, and it's so important, and that is actually the magic of the creative energy, the magic of the creative spirit, is that it's infectious, and you
Yeah,
can you can
yeah,
it spreads,
yeah.
and that's
And it
ultimately
feels
why, yeah.
it feels so good as well. Sorry, I mean, it
No,
just
no,
is a
yeah,
is a wonderful feeling when that happens, and to me is a tremendous motivation to make further work and things. Obviously, you're not making work just
yeah,
so working and teaching. I feel like is kind of interwoven in its in itself. I think that we do need to have more of a grey barrier between
yeah,
teaching versus working, because by doing something and being no in this modern age you can be quite transparent about your processes and things. And I'm always,
yes.
whenever somebody asks me, oh, what do you use for this, or what's your your method, I always try and give them as detailed an explanation as possible,
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very good to be able to pass on that
in the
process.
hope that it might get
Yeah.
them on just trying it out themselves.
But trying it out. I mean, it's like I've said a number of times on Twitter when people do reach out and say, "Oh, it's so inspiring to see what you're doing," and I often just reply, "Well, ultimately, if I've inspired you via Twitter, then I've kind of fulfilled what I ultimately wanted to do, and
Yeah,
that is to raise that energy, and to get people, just even if just momentarily, have them vibrating at a slightly higher level than they are currently, based on the general culture that we're surrounded by, which is kind of anti-dynamism. It's in a state of trying to slow you down rather than
yeah,
speed you
yeah.
up necessarily, or give you life. So yeah.
It's very interesting with Monet as well, like because Monet was obviously he had a very long and storied career, and at the beginning his work was a bit more conventional, and towards the end he went through many phases and became more abstract. But
Yes.
he was still working at the same time as Gauguin and these younger fellows who were inspired by him, but he never felt like he never was too much like he didn't try and copy them. He just did his own thing, and then they did their own thing that was sparking off of something that he did in an earlier stage. But he was respected
Yeah.
and very venerable. I really long to get to that stage where I'm kind of viewed as somebody who's venerable and has an acknowledged, or even understated influence on saying, oh, he was the guy who kind of put this together at the beginning.
Well, I think that's great. Essentially, what you're talking about is riffing off one another. Is you make a piece of artwork, and you put it out there, and you say, look, this is what I've made. This is what's come about. Get a load of this. What do you think of this? And it can spark other people. It can then spark an entirely new movement, another approach to looking at form or aesthetics, or just philosophy comes out of that. Just being able to
Yes,
look
well,
at
you have
something
your
visual and
Tolmer. You have Mr. Tolmer as well, who's done essays based on experiencing your work and stuff.
yes, I mean he's written. I mean, he's just an incredible mind, Tolma, and he has just been able to really understand this Nietzschean aspect to a lot of my work, and this pushing forward, and this this want to go on in a number of my pieces. And this was stuff that hadn't even fully realized myself. So it's very interesting to have a philosopher kind of
Yeah,
come at that
yeah.
and
It helps you
look
understand
at
your
what
own
you've.
work.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting,
Yes.
actually. When somebody commentates or riffs on your work, it actually does help
Yes.
you understand what your own work really was.
Yes. Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to also, because I mean, Adam's here, he's focusing on the Impressionists, but I always go back to the Vienna Secession and the role of Klimt,
Mm.
and the role that Klimt had in, becoming this fulcrum, or this linchpin of this secessionist movement, where you see the famous picture of the secessionists and he's sitting kind of in the throne at the back, kind of thing. He
Mm.
looks like he doesn't really belong with the other fellows. He's not wearing a suit like all the other fellows. He's kind of a bit of a wild.
The bear.
Dionysian-looking figure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's wandered out of a thicket, but he's there at the back as this very strong pillar-like force, and they all kind of, they couldn't have done it without him, because he was a man who, again, he was someone who reached really the highest heights that the Academy could have. He was painting the theatre, the ceiling of the theatre in very, these big upmarket buildings in the Ringstrasse in Vienna. And
Right.
then he really made it to that point where, that was, a high point of career. But then he chose after that to break off and actually say, no, this stuff that we're being taught is actually creating stultifying and, static work that's really not going anywhere. Even though, and
Yes.
I've experienced it, I've been there myself.
Mm.
Yeah, but
Mm.
I can't
Well, it's
compare myself to
very.
Klimt in that respect, because I never had,
Mm.
I was never boosted into the limelight. It's almost as if Klimt, he's like the equivalent today of someone like if Damien Hirst turned around or something and then
Mm.
decided to say, I'm actually going to paint classically now.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes,
because
indeed.
someone
Well.
who's
Well.
been
Well.
the top of his game, and now he's suddenly just
Yeah.
rebelled against everything that made him big.
Well, I mean, Klimt had some really powerful support, right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
he had that elevation from the right people, the right players, and he was
Yeah.
able to have, just that support and that focus. And I think it's a brave move, but I think a very honest move for him to come out and state that indeed, what you said before about the stultifying sort of, it's like
Yeah.
their approach at that time. It was like, look, this isn't going to actually help us.
No.
It's a brave
No.
move. It's a brave move to then go against. I mean, you only see a few artists doing that, really. I mean, a number of people end up getting just sort of fat and happy, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
this,
He could have gone on
this has worked out.
painting ceilings for all of his life, I suppose. But then at the same time, you're right. You're right in the sense that he did have, obviously, big patrons were already on his side, and obviously the
Yes.
government of Vienna was on his side. So they did
Yes.
go with him, and he always kept one foot in the classical world as well. He never truly went off into some completely avant-garde direction. He was always a man who essentially was just trying to reinvigorate the classical forms and the classical ideals and stuff.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, the key word there is reinvigorate.
Yes.
Because what ends up happening is you end up having people simply just reproducing rather than reinvigorating, which is, of course, to carry the fire forward and to bring it into new dimensions.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean what a lot of the people on our side say is, oh yeah, but that's progressive. It's like, no, I do believe that you can also have a level of progress or a carrying forward.
Yeah, yeah. Progress should not be
but
a dirty word. Progress is a
No.
word that's good, because the thing is that you're never static in time. You're always going
No.
somewhere, and journeys are to be
Yes.
treasured, in my opinion. They're to be loved.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is a journey. It's a cultural journey on a micro level, but on a macro level too. And I think that this idea needs to be understood, that you can progress in a glorious way, and it doesn't have to be a
Yes,
progression into sheer degeneration.
No, yeah.
People are sort of stuck in this mindset of like, but if you take the idea further, it'll eventually just end up with something on the
You'll
floor
turn
cut in
into
half
something
with paint
horrible.
on it.
You'll
It's like,
turn into something
it's like, no,
horrible, yeah.
it doesn't have to be, because it's about the philosophical underpinnings of what's actually driving those people to make that stuff. Of course, if you're bewitched by utter nonsense ideas and thoughts that are playing out inside of you, then of course you're
gonna
the stuff that
degrade
you
eventually,
it's
yeah.
going to degrade eventually.
You've got to
of
keep hold
course.
of the root, and I think Klimt he always was firmly rooted. There's an interesting quote somebody described Klimt where they said, you appear to be somewhat of a primitive or something like that, or a man from the past, but as soon as you start to paint, you become a thoroughly modern man. I think that's what they said. So
Beautiful.
he's
Yeah.
like, he was kind of straddling this line of like, I'm rooted in the past, but I have my head and I'm heading in the wind of modernity, without fear.
But that's glorious, and
Yeah, yeah.
that is absolutely the kind of spirit and power that I believe a true artist should have. Is yes, you grab back at the foundations and what was great, but you then propel them forward. You must be able to do that. And it's this idea of finding fertile ground. But of course, you I think it's dangerous to disconnect yourself from the canon. You
Yes.
are aware of the canon, of course. You must always be aware of the canon. It gives you some foundation of which you stand on.
It's interesting to think about that with the Impressionists here in terms of that, because they did, in a way, deviate quite significantly from what was, what the Academy. I know they would have thought, "Oh, this is just dreadful. Where are the, you've totally spun off and you're disregarding the foundation things." But the Impressionists, there's some people who say the Impressionists were simply trying to do. Go back to something that the old masters were doing in terms of colourful paintings, paintings that had raw colour in them, and vibrancy, and there is a lot to that. I think that we got into this mode where we got a kind of a rough, we got a bit of a strange idea about what the old masters or what the Renaissance was really about, and the Renaissance was a colourful time. It was a very decorative time, and I think
Yeah.
painting had to kind of, in the time the Impressionists became prominent, painting had lost that decorative aspect where there were, people would play with shapes and they would play with colours for the sheer kind of, decorative quality that they had. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, we got to get through these paragraphs.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
yeah.
Indeed. This is going to be like an 8-hour long
No,
video.
it won't be that.
otherwise.
It won't be that long. It's all right because we'll repeat ourselves again. So what?
Yeah.
So third paragraph here. What happened with the emergence of these Impressionists may be the case for our movement, where our style can be classed and described discreetly only later and not by ourselves. It is important for us as dissidents to recognise that we can bond in opposition, perhaps only later coming to discern common aesthetic ideals, subjects, or practices within the dissenting body. In this initial phase, it seems unwise to apply stylistic or technical criteria to those that might wish to describe themselves as part of this dissident art movement. Yet we should retain the right to disassociate our group from any individuals or groups who claim affiliation on the grounds that they are acting contrary to intentions or good standing of our movement, with no right of appeal. Very good, Adams. A movement should be based off of common benefits experienced in shared and individual ways. Some members will gain more from collective action than others, as is true of all group activity. The group activity has meaning as an assertion of unity across one stratum for artists who usually work and think in a solitary manner. Amazing points. I think this is phenomenal stuff, really, from Alexander Adams. Like it's tremendous, and this is exactly kind of thoughts that I've kind of been putting into practice without really verifying them in my mind so much.
I've noticed that very much with the group that you've put together, actually. Yes, I have noticed that. And your approach and your, looking at what other people are doing and just generally how you are very, selective and understanding of what's going on on the greater spectrum
But
of things.
I tolerate a lot of difference, and I often celebrate difference. It's about people who can get along and people who actually fucking live with each other in a sense, online or in real life, but mainly online. It's so hard to understand, I think, if you're not in it, how much factioning and fracturing happens within attempts online to build groups of people, the people that can rely on each other, people that can tolerate each other. There's because one psychopathic personality, one Machiavellian personality, it upturns the whole cart, and the whole thing turns into a scandalous wreck, basically.
Yes,
And if you
absolutely.
let one of those in, if you have one of those in, and there's not a culture that can support itself, because again, these things they often are very fragile, and if bad culture kind of comes into your group, then it's in there like a cancer, and it's very hard to uproot. over a long period of time, I think.
Well, I mean, I like how you generally vet people. I mean, you will watch them for a while before you will even
Yeah, yeah,
invite, and then you'll say, "Ooh, I'm not so sure about that based on this, this, and this." And I'm like, "Well, I really respect that because you have a criteria, you have
yeah,
a way in which you say, "Oh, I think that person could work rather well," or "I think his ideas could mix well with with those ideas." And indeed, something I've noticed. I mean, this isn't actually something that I'm hugely aware of. But since I've come online, I see that just on Twitter, for example, there is huge fractioning of ideas within certain groups. And being able to bring people together seems to become even more difficult. I mean,
it's a
it's like
Sisyphean task. It feels like a
yeah,
Sisyphean task because you've got, as soon as you kind of start to open the gates to more people as well. I'm very much
yes,
against this idea of like, because online, obviously, yeah, you have people like, they call themselves a Baptist or whatever. Nobody really calls themselves a
mm,
Baptist, but they say they put on the signifiers of a Bap
yes,
guy, and then there's
yes,
people who have, the Ortho Bros or whatever, or the
mm,
Fuentes Bros or any of this stuff, and they
yes,
all put on these certain
yes,
signifiers, but they have not really, sometimes they just want to act in their own way, and sometimes they want to act like a lunatic, and that puts a stain
mm,
on the reputation of
yes,
that whole thing. And the good thing
it
about the
does.
thing I'm trying to do is nobody has a signifier. Nobody has any kind of thing where they can put on and say, I am part of this, the fucking whatever. It's barely even got like a name. And that's, it's, I don't really
Yeah,
kind of want to give it a name or thing or anything, because then people go around
yes.
parading the name.
Yes, indeed. And then it becomes this thing that I often say, where it's like performative.
Yeah.
You're sort of then performing the archetype, but it's like a petty archetype of that
You're
entity
doing
that
it
you're
for
then
credit.
part of.
You're then doing it for
Yes,
credit, and that becomes, people use it as a substitute for a personality. But I try and get
yes,
people who've already got a personality and they've already got a lot going on, which
indeed.
is really wonderful. And then I try and
Yes,
synergize them with other people and blend, and sometimes some really, really wonderful things can happen. Sometimes people can rub against each other a little bit, but then I
yes.
always try and bring in someone else who balances who balances things out. Yeah,
Indeed,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I
So
mean, I think that is the best way to do it, and to be very selective, because of
yes,
course,
yeah.
as I've mentioned many, many times now, sort of almost a mantra now, it's that I don't believe in a mass
No, no.
group. I believe more in a sort of a selective, tight knit group of energized individuals, and
Yes.
the energy then emanates out from that group, that small tight knit group, and that energy is then it holds a greater collective,
Yeah.
much like a magnet
Because
will
they don't
hold.
feel like they have to be part of this. They don't feel like they need to be. They can be themselves and still be like, oh look, they're creating something wonderful here. I'm a supporter, but I don't feel like I
Yeah.
have to don this kind of weird
No. No.
affectation to be part of it.
No, no. I mean, it's about being able to hold. It's about being able to hold planets in a kind of gravitational, system, so that they're still their own entities, but there is. You have that energy that emanates out, and it holds things it holds things in place, but but in a healthy manner. I would start to be very upset if we were to ever get some kind of group further going, and you had this sort of performative, like, oh, yeah, well, we're part of that, and
Yeah,
da da da. The people are sort of
yeah.
performing this thing. It's very superficial,
Yeah, yeah. So,
and it
interesting example, really quickly. There's
yeah,
just called to my mind. Zukalski made this group with the Horned
that's
Heart, right?
correct.
And I think that did end up suffering from a lot of the maladies that you just described, in the sense that people, they really wanted to fly the flag for this super genius, this icon Zukalski, whose
Mm-hmm.
personality really fueled the whole thing. But
Yes.
he was unable to control necessarily how these people presented this group and how they controlled the reputation of this group. And I think that at
That's
the
yeah.
end it ended up affecting him negatively, in the sense that these kind of wacky fellows were associated with his name and with his work. In the end, I don't know necessarily the history so much of the horned heart thing, but it seemed like he was very
Yes.
intent on making something quite regimented. And it was quite like,
Well,
my
it was
these are my heavies, basically. My
Well, it's extraordinary what he did, because I mean, I'm using the word cult in a bad way here, but he created in some respects
no, it was cultish,
a
absolutely,
it was
absolutely.
cultish,
Yeah, it wasn't a
but I
cult in
think
the
that
sense of like we all
no,
worshipped, but there was an element of worship of
that
him.
yes, and I think that is. I think that's actually very normal in a kind of, the artist and the larger group. But I think that, it can spiral out of control, and
Yes.
the people that are associating with you can then just end up, yeah, essentially being corrosive and melting the whole thing down.
And the problem with somebody
Yeah.
who's like Zukowski as well, who's a very mercurial kind of personality, where these people
Mm,
tried to match his ability in art and they never were able to, and that kind of
mm,
again was, kind of a sad thing because they didn't try and stand out on their own merits. They simply tried to make a kind of imitation of Zukowski, and he's a very singular creative, and it's very hard to make something that which is
yes.
imitating of him.
Yes, that's not the best approach and the best way to go about things. Inspire on one another, but otherwise it just if it's not if it's not done correctly, what ends up happening is indeed you just have these kind of poor pastiches kind of getting done, and yeah, brings the energy down. Not the best approach.
You have to let everybody flourish in their own way and respect them as
Certainly.
individual little geniuses, I think, in their own right. And again, as Adam says here, some of them disappear and they don't, they maybe don't have a place in history or whatever. But that's again, I always look back to the pre-Raphaelites. There's so many wonderful stories about these women and these lovely girls that they associate with the pre-Raphaelites, and everybody was having a great time. Sometimes it got a bit messy, but it was all part of a constellation, as you said. It was a universe that kind of fueled itself, and it had a lot of energy just simply generated from these people. I had such a wonderful time, just even in the pub before we went into Mr. Adams's talk. We were in there for like fucking 6 hours or so. We were in there for a
It
long
was an
time.
amazing it was
Yeah,
an amazing hangout. It was just great to have everyone come together, and like everyone knew, okay, after the bar, we were going to go
yeah.
and
Go and
listen to this
storm
talk, and
storm a
that's
building.
right, we were going to go and storm the place, which was fantastic,
No, it's
and
it's a really really warm
yeah,
feeling to actually seeing
yeah,
everybody arrive, and everybody's like
yes,
enjoying seeing everyone there, and we all know we're there for a kind of a common purpose, but everyone also is,
absolutely,
you know
absolutely,
everyone also is kind of letting each other be themselves. It's not like some weird freaky nationalist thing where everybody comes in a room and is like who's
no,
being the most like based or fucking make the most
yeah,
racist.
yeah,
There's always someone making like really loud racist remarks or something because he's trying to get
mm,
attention. And
yeah,
Lucy
that's kind of
Lucy's described a
cringy,
lot of this
yeah,
stuff to me. It's cringy. I don't think
yeah,
we have anyone cringy, and that's really nice.
thankfully no
I would
one there was
expel. I would
honestly, it was a
expel.
really high quality
Yeah,
group.
yeah,
I was very happy. I was
yeah.
very happy. I thought, my God, this is so fantastic. Group comes together. I'm not hearing petty political
No,
discussion.
there was
Everyone
nary
was
nary.
talking culture.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was great.
yeah.
Exactly how it should be.
And this point really quickly as well before we move on. Also, the idea of what's he say? Yeah, we should retain the right to dissociate our group from any individuals or groups who claim affiliation. So, in a sense that we do have enough of a front that we could potentially array if somebody came along and said, "Oh, actually, we're part of this dissident. We're whatever." And so, actually, no, you're not.
Mm-hmm.
You are not.
Indeed.
You are a haram.
Yeah,
Um,
no, you have to be able to defend
yes.
what you stand for and who you are
Because there will be vampires.
as a collective.
There will be vampires who
Sure.
come and they try and like feed off your energy and things. I don't know if you've experienced this yourself in Antwerp at all, but
I think that will always happen in these sort of creative circles. It happens a lot. I mean, you have these sort of tag-alongs and stuff like that, and they generally pull the mood down if they are negative
yeah.
people.
And if they're
What's
allowed to propagate and things, and
Of course, yeah. I mean, and what's important to understand is that, this collective that Adams is talking about and the collective you've created, it's not hard to imagine that if we were to, you know, do a series of group shows together, if we were to step on toes, it wouldn't be hard to imagine that the media could set up a certain situation where they say, oh,
yes,
and this other group are doing this and they're connected. It's like, yeah, you have to be very careful how things are going to be framed,
oh yeah,
because
yeah,
if there's one thing I know about the art and culture world is the media. They're a slippery bunch.
yes. It was. Well, I'm very prepared for the very worst, possible things to be, committed to
Indeed.
writing and to video and all sorts of things. And obviously, I'm a very insular person in the sense that I would, not give an interview or not, say anything really to anybody without extreme good vibes. But then I
Yeah.
can't say that for everybody else. There might be, again, everyone's their own person, and I respect everyone who being there. I honestly am kind of hinging things on, sounds cheesy, but literally the power of friendship. It's friendship is magic, and
Absolutely, it is.
no matter what slurs and smarmy things and things that they might write or things, you've got to remember a solid foundation, and a foundation that's based on actual mutual appreciation and mutual love for one another's work. That is what will hold everything together.
100%.
The pre-Raphaelites got terrible press. They got the press at their fucking throats. In their early shows, and then the press in the end turned over and they rolled over and they said, actually, this is actually very good, and we kind of thought you were geniuses, but at the beginning,
Yeah,
no,
it's
we
interesting.
we hated you.
Well, that is really usually how things go. Yeah, I mean, you have to battle through that for a while, and then before you know it, they're rubbing shoulders with you, and actually they're like, well, we really want you to do this and do that, and before you know it, though, you have to be thinking, is this a group that I want to get in bed with? These are all things you have to address later down the
Oh, of
line, of
course,
course.
yeah. But the
But
interesting thing is,
the,
Fen, the interesting thing is, we actually nowadays, it is a bit of an interesting situation, because we do have a very strong media apparatus of our own who don't have a small, they're not dealing with small numbers here. You've got people like
no,
Lotus
that's
Eaters.
very true.
You got New Culture Forum. You got even like these kind of libtarded slightly ones like trigonometry and stuff, where they control a big platform.
You've got IM. You've got
I
IM
am, oh, of course.
1776.
Well, I am. We know Mark's always going to be on our side. Obviously, published your work in the very first issue. No, of course. There's a lot of media heft that can be brought to support stuff like this.
Indeed,
Because
indeed.
they spent the last 6 years
yeah.
building it. Since the
Yes.
Trump years, people really spent, like someone like Stix Hexenhammer, for example. He built a real media empire out of his bedroom.
Incredible, really. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's extraordinary, really. Yeah, but I mean, that's the power of the internet. It's something that I'm noticing on just my relatively small, Twitter account. It has a reach, and it's kind of interesting. You think, God, actually, the kind of reach and the people that I'm able to get to. Who cares if the mainstream press are, going to give you
because not a lot of people read
bit of
that
a
stuff
culture
anyway.
section? Yeah.
Not a lot of people read that stuff anyway. And the very nature. I think Wyndham Lewis probably wrote stuff about this as well. Like the fact that if the Times puts an article about you in it, you've already won. Because so many people are reading that.
Yeah.
That
it's a wet dream.
It's a bad idea for them to do it, because they're going to amplify something that's going to be detrimental to their project.
For me, it's a bit of a wet dream, really, to arrive in something like that. I mean,
to have a hit piece done on you in the Times, or
it's fantastic. I mean, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful, but of course, they're also aware of that. They don't really want to touch on these things. I mean, they try and starve you of oxygen. That's the way that they'll approach it. But of course, as you said, through the power of social media and the media groups that are now on our side, I think we can get considerable traction. With just a small amount of organisation, actually.
Yeah, you just got to be tough as well. I think I need to. I'll learn to be. I'm very mentally stable these days. But again, I do take things very seriously. I'm a very sensitive person. Everyone knows this. And there's probably in the future they'll find ways to attack me in ways that hurt me and stuff. I mean, I'm very easily hurt. And that's fine.
Well, yeah. I mean, that
you're a very tough fellow, Ben.
I think it's just something you
just have to deal with it in your own way.
Yeah, you will in time. Just you'll just start rolling with it. And it will just strengthen you, and it will give you more energy.
Yes.
The thing is with the number of people who have spoken out against my work and stuff, they've energized me.
Yeah.
The thing is their hope, of course, has been to make me curl up and go away. But I think to myself, look, I'm staying around and I'm going to keep on coming.
Yeah.
There's nothing you're going to do about it.
Well, you believe it. I think the nice thing is that we do believe in the strength of our own work, and I think that is the thing that will keep us going in the long run.
Sure.
There's the average person, looks at I always say this. My sister, she fell in love with your work as soon as she saw it, and she's, one of the most down to earth, normal people in the world. And those are the people who really are, the media goblins and things. They can only do so much to bend people's minds in the direction of, that last sentence there where he said, the group activity has meaning as an assertion of unity across one stratum for artists who usually work and think in a solitary manner. So, I mean, that in itself is such a powerful, it's such a great statement by Adams. I mean, that's a marvelous statement. Assertion of unity. I just love this idea. Like, yes, we are very separate minds and we're separate styles. We don't have the same style. Some people they look to this era or to look to that era, or they have a background in contemporary art, or they have a background in design, or a background in video game work, whatever.
Yes.
But assertion of unity is such a powerful thing. That's something the right has a tremendous problem with. I have to say, like, there's always some Twitter thread or some article saying, why can't groups on the right, unify, or why can't they, why do they have to have this petty thing, going on? But yeah, it's because they're powered by these very individual thinkers who can't come to terms on each other, and they're basically like mafia gangs trying to occupy the same racket. They're trying to do the same. They're trying to occupy the same territory, basically. But again, I celebrate difference. I celebrate artistic difference, really, and I think of course, it's worth celebrating that.
There should be difference, but of course that there has to be that understanding that if everyone's going to constantly be at each other's throat, then how are you going to,
it's going nowhere.
To have that
You're
force?
spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
The energy is directed in the wrong direction. It's completely the wrong direction.
This is it. I mean, there is that saying, it's like herding cats, right? And it's very, very true. And you see that hugely. I mean, you will. I mean, I constantly have people, and I think it's good, but you constantly have people trying to do an edgy take on your work and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to try and take him down, and oh, I figured him out, I've got him here, and you just think to yourself, man, if there was a little bit more, unity on our side, we'd be really making a hell of a lot more stuff moving forward. We would gain a hell of a lot more ground. Yeah. But I think that comes with the kind of people who gravitate towards the kind of philosophies that we're associated with. That they are usually quite individualistic type thinkers.
Yeah. And with that, there's a tendency towards, like, that's a good point, because there's a tendency towards this navel gazing kind of, we're all doomed kind of mentality, and I don't have time to build an art movement based around people who think we're doomed. I think that's what the contemporary. True. I think that's what the contemporary art movement think. I think that they have a nihilism and a kind of a bleakness about their. Yes. There's no real joy or no. True. The joy is gone.
You've really hit the nail on the head, and it's something we were actually talking about recently, with that new monument that was released. That was put out. Well, there was of course the. Fill me in. What was it? There was.
Well, there were quite a few recently. There was the MLK one with the weird arms and things, and then there was the strange woman with no arms, and she's tentacles.
That's right. That's right. And of course, the whole of Twitter space erupted with, oh my God, look at this degeneracy. It's terrible. Oh, this is a sign of the times. Everything's terrible.
This is the devil.
This is the devil. Everything's bad. And I just couldn't jump on board. I was like, guys, we do have the ability. We do have the skill, the connections, the ability to actually bring something else. Yeah. We can do that. Yeah. It's possible.
A sign of a moribund. It's a moribund culture and a moribund creative faculty that lets these things, permeate themselves into. But they do rely as well. Unfortunately, that we are addicted, and Geo says this. A lot of people say this, that we are addicted, unfortunately, to the outrage economy, to the look at this filth, look at this degeneracy kind of thing, and that becomes kind of a means unto itself, And I am very against it. That is something that does need to be stepped over. A lot of things need to be stepped over.
There's a lot of stepping over. Yeah, huge amount of stepping over. But
it has to be joyful stepping. It has to be dancing almost. I rave over it. I dance over it.
Absolutely. There really has to be a change in attitude, and I think confidence is so important, and
absolutely,
if you have confidence and belief, and you're driven by a spirit of, we can do this, we can get this done. It's not an impossibility, guys. I think that's a better place to put your mind and your spirit, and a lot can change in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Absolutely. We could turn this whole thing around.
Masterpieces have been made. Rubens painted the Deposition painting in 9 months. So a lot of things can happen in a short space of time.
A lot of things can happen, and if we work together on certain things, it can happen. I mean, look, there was like a guy recently talking to me on Twitter who was saying, yeah, but if you wanted to have a monument that was, more based on some of our principles, and it was, powerful and
They
glorious.
would
That
block
would
it,
never,
they would
yeah, they
tear
would
it
block
down,
it.
they
They
would
would,
block it or whatever. They wouldn't
you
even
know,
let it happen, but
yeah, and it's like, well, actually, no,
no,
they,
no,
they,
no,
they,
no.
they could, and frankly, do you know
Well,
how
there
many
is evidence
people?
that there is concrete
Yeah,
evidence that we can't necessarily divulge, but there is concrete evidence that
yeah.
they are interested in that sort of thing, and
There are people with our views and principles who are very interested
good
in an
taste as well, and they've got taste.
with good taste,
Yeah,
who are very interested in an alternative. But as I spoke to you in London, it's these people who have the ability to make certain things move and happen, they're on the sidelines. They're waiting. They're not going to jump in to an immature group. Let's say. I mean, I'm not saying that we're all immature. I'm just saying it's from what they can see from them peering in. They're sort of, well, should we? Shouldn't we? Do we want to associate with these people? Ha
there
ha ha
needs to be
ha.
a
Is
rock solid foundation. I understand
yeah,
completely that moneyed men and men of power, they are very, very cautious about what they put their name to and what they
indeed,
put their wallet to as well.
indeed.
And
I
I'm
mean,
just a
look.
stoke from the street. I'm a man from the gutter of Croydon, and the aspiration is something that can be taken to the highest echelons of
Well, this is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that I think is very important to keep in mind is imagine that you're someone who has the ability to set up a patronage. You're not going to want to be associated with some kind of edge lord on Twitter who might make a piece for you, and then suddenly the media just runs some terrible hit pieces on the guy who's funded it, and then himself and his business and everyone
yeah,
associated
yeah.
with
They
him
have
is then
powerful
under the
strings that they can pull that will,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I get it. It's important to understand. I understand why there is this element of, oh, we're kind of hanging on. We're not so sure at the moment. But that's why I think it's very important that the art movements and the creative groups that are starting to form now keep a high level of professionalism.
Yeah.
You must speak at a high level, conduct yourself at a higher level. Once you have that and you're seen as a serious individual, not some petty political person doing silliness,
Not trying to
but you're
cheap
actually a
shots or
serious
yeah,
individual.
yeah.
Yeah, then they can say, look, I could get behind these people and I could get behind that art, and I could actually, because to be a patron, you're a hugely important player,
Oh
and of
yeah.
course you can
You're the
begin to say,
man who
look, well,
makes
that
it
was the
literally
movement that I,
happen. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like I was the guy that was able to bring this movement about. I mean, it's an incredible position to be in, but you don't want to do that in a movement
But you
of a
take
bunch of
all the fall.
clowns.
If they take a hit, you take a hit as well. And
100%. That's it.
yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
But that's why people like the Medicis or whatever, they raised these young men, like people like Benini or whatever. He was 13, and you see, oh, this boy is going to be the next superstar, and we mold him in that way. Because so he's literally made to be our guy. But in this world,
Yeah.
everybody's kind of out on their own, and some of
Yes.
them fall together, some of them fall away. Everybody's got their own kind of
Yes.
Some
Yes.
people
Some
come
people are
from
kind of
privilege.
loose
Some people,
cannons. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's a wild world out there, really. And I mean,
It's wild. It's wild. It's very exciting. It's full of energy, of course, on the positive front.
yes, that's right.
But
There's a
it's
lot of
it's
untapped
it's
energy.
it's a lot of untapped energy, but it's very chaotic, and I can see why there would be people who have some concerns.
Reservations. Yeah,
Yeah, some reservations, like, oh God, is this guy going to fly off the rails and suddenly become totally nuts and start doing something mad? It's like, yeah, I get it.
yeah. So I mean, the fourth paragraph here, I think, is it? Yeah. So
Yeah.
there are times when art is made in isolation, but is seen at a distance to be connected. Consider the symbolist movement, and that's a good one. Me and Gio did discuss the symbolist movement a little bit on his channel a while ago. Running from the 1850s or even the 1820s in multiple North and Central European countries, and to a lesser extent in North America, this movement spanned continents, encompassed many distinct schools, and covers artists who did not know of each other's work, yet we see many common themes. There are two examples of movements not centered on explicit creeds. The first is the Impressionists, with artists co-located in time, place, and professional cognizance of their fellows, but with disparate stylistic, thematic, iconographic, political, and technical concerns. And the other is the Symbolists, where artists are generally divided by location, time, and professional cognizance of their fellows, but with similar stylistic, thematic, iconographic, political, and technical concerns. So that's very interesting. Now, both are seen as cohesive, yet at the time the artists did not link themselves formally. So that's a good point. Obviously, Adams is reiterating kind of things that he said earlier there. The symbolist is very interesting because the symbolist is a very woolly, kind of loose idea, but now we kind of put them into this context. Obviously, you look at someone like Moreau or Ferdinand Knopf or whatever, and you think, oh, that's symbolism. Because, they were dealing with certain things. It was kind of a zeitgeist of exploring the unconscious, getting away from...
Yes.
It was moving into an internal world of self-reflection and kind of like ideal archetypal forms and stuff like that.
Yes,
Very
dreamlike.
Archetypal. Yeah. But it's those guys, like you said, they didn't need to be necessarily aware of each other. And I know that for a fact that there are people who I'm not aware of to this, at this point, who are doing exactly the same thing as me. And there may be another Stoke, somewhere else in the world, and we just don't know about each other.
This is very true. I mean, I dream to find other sculptors out there who are in solitude, and we don't know about them yet, and they're just working away in their studios, and they've kind of it's that escape, shall we say? They've escaped the kind of rot of what's going on, and they're going their own way. I would love to discover those people. I mean, I'm sure we will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they will gravitate eventually to you or to me, or or we'll find them somehow. As I find most of my people in the wild, as it were.
Yes.
And sometimes there's very fortuitous circumstances that bring certain people to me. Particularly some of the lovely people in London we have. But yeah, I mean,
amazing group in London. Really,
there's millions.
Such a terrific, such a terrific group in London.
Yeah, it's fantastic people. It's a very well balanced group of people. But again, it's finding those people is a matter of a constant. You can't expect it to happen immediately, and you can't expect it to coalesce and form something. Even after we're all dead, they'll say, "Oh, that was actually a thing," But I think nowadays online, it's maybe online is a bit more easy because there is constant communication. Because you've got to remember these fellows, they didn't see each other maybe as much, and they were communicating a bit less. And it's interesting. He says that some of the symbolists they actually were on different continents entirely, and that's a whole different ball game really in 1820 or 1850 as it is today.
I know.
You can't just DM your fellow in if you're in North America, you can't just DM someone in Germany or whatever. Although obviously people sent letters and all sorts of correspondence to each other.
I mean, this is the incredible thing about the internet, of course, is that I can just suddenly flip out my phone,
it's
take
fast.
a quick picture,
it's violent, and it's fast,
and just suddenly show you like, oh hey, Stoke, this is what I'm busy
we can
in my
have
studio
this
on
conversation.
right now.
we can do this conversation exactly, and it's just simply out there right away, and that does enable something, I think, to accelerate its fruition and it to grow in a way where you can have a kind of hyper
the velocity.
Yeah.
There is a velocity of ideas
that's it,
and sharing of ideas that is just unimaginable to art movements of the past. And so I think we have actually that's amazing and something that we will continue to use and exploit as our ideas and
you can draw on so much. That's a very good point, because you can really draw on so much teaching wise, and obviously it's hard to sometimes you feel there's option paralysis where you don't know who to turn to or what to look at, but at the same time it is very powerful to say, oh look, we can all, if I'm inspired by something that Rubens has done or whatever, or Titian, I can just say, look guys, everyone gather around and have a look at this. I'm really inspired by this at the moment, and it sparks off other people's creativity immediately.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
But internet time is weird, because internet time is like, Geo says this as well. Internet, 1 year on the internet is like a decade, in terms of
wow, I know the changeability of it. I can't keep up. I cannot keep up. Yeah.
But I think that the thing is not to try and just kind of let the tide is going to flow in its way, because the internet kind of churns constantly. It's this very
constantly
brutal churning machine. But things that survive, I think that they have a certain solidity. Like 4chan, for example. I always say 4chan. 4chan's nearly 20 years old now. I believe it might be 20 years old this year. That is a site which grew in a tremendous it was something that started off very early in the internet, kind of, popularity of the internet 2003, where people were just kind of, the culture was very different back then. But then for that site to have survived, and it's got an outdated kind of interface. It looks like a fossil, but it's so firmly rooted in the culture of the online world, and it's a culture generator. It's a culture machine. You could not really conceive of a world without it, and that's what I want to be. I want to have, I want to be so firmly rooted in the culture that you can't get rid of me. And that's exactly what Klimt was. Klimt was like you could not get away from the influence of Klimt. In Vienna in the the beginning of the 20th century at all. He was perennial. He was all over the place.
That's a wonderful position to be in, indeed, and also a position of being able to help others out as well. I mean, it's a great place to inspire and continue that energy going.
People need to feel like they're not alone. It's a really, really big deal.
So important.
Even if they work on their own, but they need to feel like that they're not just doing it in vain. Maybe you felt a little bit before you grew your Twitter and things. Maybe you felt a little bit like you were working kind of in vain, or you had banging your head against the wall.
It was certainly getting that way. I came to a point where I was just like, wow, when your oxygen has just been cut off, you do come to a point where you think, my goodness, I'm just here in my studio on my own. I can't really resonate with too many people. You've got a stone in front of you. You've just got to push through, and you're thinking, good God, am I ever going to find people that actually resonate with this work? And I mean, of course, coming online, you think, shit, wow, it's great. There's a niche, and it's wonderful to find like-minded individuals. It has really given me huge amounts of energy since coming online to find yourself, your group, and just all the other people on Twitter who
it's a
are
constant source of energy
culture.
for me, man. Like really, it's an endless. You've got to have breaks and things. You've got to have time to yourself. I'm a very introverted person, obviously. So you've got to have time to yourself where you kind of shut yourself away. But you've got to you have to come back to a bustling. This is the world of the Renaissance to me. It's like I always imagine like the world of the Renaissance is a world where you could step outside and some wild shit would always be going on. Like somebody would be dueling, or there'd be a party, there'd be a pageant, there'd be all sorts of crazy stuff happening, and you were just inspired. You could not help but be inspired. And the facilitators of that, the patrons, they knew that and they enjoyed making that world. That's why I do have some respect for people like Dorsey and people like Elon or whatever, where they had a vision, and they had a vision of a world where people would communicate, and they would have that pageantry atmosphere and have that kind of joyful atmosphere. That was the overall vision. Obviously, it got twisted. It got turned into this kind of tech dystopia where people can't say this or can't say that. But the vision that was there, the darker sides of human nature, they're always going to seep in, and there's always going to be a conflict there, and there's always going to be something dodgy happening. But
I mean,
it's better that it's happening than it's not. It's better that there's something happening.
The vanilla vision was extraordinary, and there's still aspects of that survive. And of course, yes, it's in these times. I think it's vital that we have such platforms. I mean, just going back to that thing, when the general status quo doesn't want a certain type of culture to proliferate.
They'll cut it off and they'll shut it off, but they can't.
Exactly.
It's not so easy.
They can't do that with. They can't do that with. Thankfully, with Twitter and other certain platforms, I'm very thankful of that. I mean, it enables there to be the kind of culture and the art even that we're pushing towards now.
Yeah. But also, you do have to have again the element of the thing that a lot of people fall down on is the real life stuff where they.
It's so important
to go and see someone. That is because online you can be anybody, and in real life you're just you, unfortunately, and you're maybe a meager shadow of your online persona or whatever. But
yes, no, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, like just these meetups in London. When I sort of dash through, it gives me so much energy just to see everyone in the flesh.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. Being able to count. I mean, just like meeting. Meeting Columba, for example, was just it was great fun. I mean, he's a terrific guy
My
in
sister
the
said
flesh.
he's one of the loveliest young men she's ever met. So shout out to
Great fun.
Columba there. I mean, and just having people around that. You have poets. Exactly. You've got people who are writers. You've got poets. You've got sculptors, illustrators, people who do a bunch of stuff, critics, Mr. Adams and Ferro,
Indeed.
and
Yeah.
it's a real scene, and I always remember that funny little painting of it's not painted by Wyndham Lewis, but it's got Wyndham Lewis in it, where they're all in the cafe together. You know the one,
Yes.
the one I'm
I know
thinking
the
of.
exact
Yeah,
one. It's
I'll
the
show it
vorte-
on the
it's
screen.
the painting of the vorticists in a cafe
Yeah,
having like a hangout, having a beer.
and everyone's
And
like
it's just
crowded in there in this kind of like
yeah.
dangerous way, and I really love that picture. It's just because they're so characterful, and there's like this kind of like serious like Chad energy from everyone.
It's funny because I get feelings of that. That sort of feelings of that energy are around us when we're hanging out in London. I mean, I really have that feeling.
And you've got beautiful women as well. I always say this, but it's just so important to have beautiful women.
That's also incredibly important indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to go on to the next paragraph. Yeah. So I mean, he's talking here about So as Adams, he goes on and he contrasts these things here with the futurists. So he says that we can think of the Impressionists and the Symbolists as opposites to the Italian Futurists, who had a joint manifesto and committed to an explicit aesthetic positions and political goals. This also applies to a slightly lesser degree to the Surrealists in Paris, organised under André Breton. Like the Futurists, they spread their ideas and they set an example of what was expected from the group members, all through publications and periodicals, as well as their own journals and newsletters. The Surrealists, who advocated psychic liberation and the pursuit of the personal subconscious, were also politically orthodox communists and prone to endless roll calls of the faithful in terms of joint letters. The Surrealists formed groups that would examine members in hearings to determine conformity before voting on whether to expel the member. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. It had the worst
Yeah. It
aspects of
sounds.
a
Yeah.
clique and a political splinter faction. I actually didn't know that at all. I was completely ignorant of that fact. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was gonna say pretty hardcore actually. Pretty hardcore. Yeah.
I didn't know there was this communist element to the Surrealists at all, actually. But I mean,
Yeah.
the futurist thing is interesting because obviously you model a lot of your work on the stuff that the futurists themselves created work wise, and obviously you had a manifesto to accompany the work. But I think that the futurists again they had a definite like you said, they had a political goal as well, and they wanted to see a
They
certain
did.
social change and embrace a certain, because there was obviously a lot of technological change happening as well, and that was what a lot of their work was
Yes.
about, and it was about
Yes.
embracing that. And I think
Indeed.
we're a lot less explicit with the stuff that I think we're doing. I think we're
The
just trying to make some nice work, really.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, of course, I'm very inspired by the Italian futurists, of course. Not solely just them, but of course the vorticists. But I suppose the thing that I ultimately am trying to do with my work is first and foremost create a strong piece of work that can resonate and uplift and inspire and give a sense of verve to life. I mean,
Yeah.
that is important, but also on another aspect, it's a celebration of a state of being. It's that there is a social aspect to it. It's a celebration of that vital energy that is in life, that is in our world. And
But you're simply trying to remind people that exists. You're not trying necessarily to push forward into some new like futuristic paradigm where but you're
no,
calling on something that's more perennial and simply exists of its own.
exactly. It's not a celebration. I'm not here celebrating the motorcycle or the
Or
aeroplane
even newness
like
itself. I don't think you're
like
interested in the idea of
Marinetti.
newness and the idea of like something that is.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, indeed, it's taking aspects of their language because it was very energetic, and then it's tying aspects of that to a perennial and more archaic element, but then accelerating that forward into this kind of marrying those elements together and
I think
talking
people
about this
understate.
energetic. Yeah.
I think people understate the archaic elements in your work, which I think is very
Mm.
important as well. Like that's a lot of where the power comes from. It's like it's a very primitive,
Mm.
brutal rootedness of your work.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
these figures and these types. They don't necessarily have signifiers of an era to them. And again, like you said, you're not celebrating the train or the motorcycle or technology of its own sake.
No.
You're celebrating the forces that it embodies.
Indeed, it's the principles, the archetypes. Absolutely, that's it. That's it. I mean, when you talk about the futurists, they had a kind of they were politically charged, and they wanted to achieve. I mean, you've got first wave Italian futurism, which wasn't in bed with the regime. That was
Yes.
second. That was actually second wave futurism that then got in bed with the regime.
Right.
And so that came across later because they became more and more sort of politically charged, and that energy became more and more focused towards a kind of political end. Of course, certain works in the later stages actually was used within
Overt kind
propaganda
of
posters and
propagandist. Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So of course, I mean, these movements again, they get in bed with establishments,
Yes.
which can be for better or worse. I mean, it depends. History can tell that story way better than we can at the moment we're in now.
Oh, of course. Yeah. That's the thing.
But
You don't really know until
yeah,
the dust has
of
settled, as it
course,
were. Yeah.
indeed, you don't know. But if it's ultimately why I don't like to talk about petty
Yes.
politics, because that's not really where I am. I'm not interested in hearing about certain low-grade political discussions.
No.
I'm much more excited by the perennial and the spiritual battle. Actually, it's for me, it's more about the aesthetic and spiritual
And you're battling with the
place
materials.
that we
You're
have.
you're battling with some real, again, primeval ancient stuff.
Yes, yes. It's trying to bring that into the time we're in now, and also look forward even further as to how we can bring those energies
Yeah.
and celebrate them here now.
I think that people
It's
people who buy your work, I
yeah,
notice on Twitter, there's always somebody who I get the impression that when people buy your work, they really do view it as almost like a totem of something that they want to bring into their own life and embody that
sure.
spirit, embody that energy.
Sure. Well,
Definitely.
that's also my hope. Yes, that's definitely my hope. I do like that people can identify with the work and find a power, a spiritual power within it. It's like a piece of sculpture is a solidification of an element. You've materialized this immaterial force, let's say, and you've
Yes.
been able to bring it into and solidify it into a physical being. That's wonderful. There's a real magic to that. And that indeed, as you say, I really hope people can find that energy, and many people do, and hence why they sort of go forward and collect. But
And
I
that
think it
is
is
quite.
important that we.
Sorry,
Sorry.
sorry.
No, I think it is important that we don't, you know, get caught up in this idea of, oh, we're here as political
Yeah,
activists, because
yeah.
I think that is a danger, and
Yeah.
it
I
it
never want
will
to be anti-woke. I mean, the idea of just
it
being
will
anti-woke in general, like I'm definitely against shitty art. That goes without saying, and I'm against stuff
100%.
that
Yeah.
sucks. And I want to bring, obviously, yeah, I have my own principles and my own biases and things I want to bring, and I want to bring back fucking sexy women and stuff. I want to bring back
Yeah,
erotic energy and powerful energy, and like
of course.
I want to bring back female archetypes that you can actually respect for their danger and for their presence,
Mm.
but also for their warm and their lovely aspects as well. And I want to have a healthy relationship between men and women, where myth is the way to transmit that, through archetypal
Absolutely.
stories, and also
Yes.
there's a huge Christian aspect to my work. I want people to celebrate the figure of Jesus and actually look into the
Yeah.
humanity of Jesus in a way, but also you know that eternal, that love. I think a lot of Christian art nowadays, it's very flat and very sterile, and it misses out on the
Yes.
mystery, the
Very
real
true.
mystery of that love that Jesus Christ brings to everybody and
Very true.
inspires in his image. In terms of surrealists, the surrealists, is very difficult for them to say, like, a government is it's very hard for a government to say, oh, we like these ideas of your strange erotic dreams, or your what the hell is this, like melting faces, or strange objects. That's hard for a government to use as its own kind of artistic force.
Latch onto. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
true. To
but
piggyback onto. Yeah.
but then they had this weird communist element where they themselves took an ideology and they put it into their own group. It's quite bizarre. I didn't know about this at all. But I mean, as Adam says here, so he says they examine members in hearings to determine conformity before voting whether to expel the member. And I think that's a bit too autistic for. I think that if
Oh
you're
God.
if
Yeah.
you're too constrained by like these dogmas and Yeah, and this is what the left does, really. The left is constantly doing these
They
tests of
are.
people, and they're trying to say, "Oh,
Oh
you
God, yeah.
ideologically pure enough? You're expelled. Your trans card has been revoked or whatever because or your black card has been revoked because you supported, you didn't support BLM or whatever nonsense." But
Indeed, indeed, it's this constant churning over. It's like, okay, you were good for a moment. Now we'll cut you
yeah,
down. We put someone else there,
as
and
long
then
as
you
you're
wait, and
on
then
board with the
boom, and another one.
project, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a constant churning over of sort of human resources to be able to meet their agenda. It's very gross
yeah.
to watch, actually.
It's interesting that Adams he's deliberately contrasting here that the idea that the Surrealists advocated psychic liberation and the pursuit of the personal subconscious, but then at the same time they had this kind of like, you know, very regimented like commie structure where you had to conform
Yes,
to all these
it's
there's
strange.
weird
Huh?
it's a weird
It's a
contradiction in
very odd
there.
mix. It really
Yeah,
is a very odd
yeah.
mix. Yeah, yeah,
So he does say here, so for a new movement in our age, the surrealist model seems the worst of all. While it leads to a degree of artistic prominence and financial success for members, many of those surrealist artists had private collectors and commercial galleries unconnected to the movement proper. The endless wrangles about who followed orthodoxy led to separate factions, such as the Documents group headed by Georges Bataille. It also resulted in some of the best known surrealists, Giacometti, Dali, Masson, being excommunicated, and of course, Dali, famously a man of certain persuasions, as you may know, being excommunicated with some of the best and most typical work of the school's style being made outside of the movement organisation. This clearly damaged the credibility of the movement. The contrary peril is that careerists, opportunists, and bad faith actors. Oh, so just this first half of this paragraph here, I think that's very interesting. So you don't want to make something that's too structured and too regimented and orthodox, because the good people, like if I tried to make you, then like make stuff in my style or something, you would just say, "No, I'm off now. I'm going away now," and you would be like Dali because you don't want to go to roll call every day and be told that you're not a good communist and you've not pleased the
yeah.
party. You say, well, I'm going to
God, yeah,
take
that would be
myself away
tough.
and I'm going to take myself and do my own thing. But without that
Yeah,
permissiveness, nothing would hold. It's a contradiction in terms, because if you try and, it's a seeming contradiction, because if you try and push somebody too far and say you need to do something that is in line with everybody else, you're going to just
yeah,
alienate them, and
yeah.
they're going to react badly against that. You've got to let
Indeed.
people flourish in their own way.
Yeah, you're going to end up starving people,
Mm.
and that's really not the way to go. I mean, I think what is important is that there must be a certain code of
Mm.
conduct, and there must be a certain structure. But of course, with all
And a certain
creative
standard as
people,
well, a certain
yeah,
standard too.
standard,
But the standard can be enforced in
yeah,
different ways as well. It doesn't have to be a regimented kind of thing where, you know, I like the idea. Me and Ferro actually were discussing doing a yearly roundup of work and things. I think that's quite a good idea in a physical format, in a magazine format,
yes,
because we did
yes,
print a little magazine.
brilliant. By the way, really
Yeah,
enjoyed
no,
that
I
piece.
thought it
Yeah,
turned out right. But just showcasing, I think there's maybe 8 different artists of our group in there,
yeah,
and just having 5 or 6 pieces on a page or whatever, and it holds together really quite well, even throughout the
yes,
disparate styles, because it has a certain curation. I did the
yeah,
selection of what's involved,
yeah.
and a certain
You did
design
that
as well.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but then you can't make people say like, you're not making work which is our work. You can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets difficult if you start being too regimented in how people must conduct their style, their approach, then you're going to end up starving their voice.
Yeah.
And what the
The
resulting
work's not
issue
even going to
is
be
that you
better either. I don't think that
no,
necessarily makes better work.
what ends up happening is people then start to sort of copy a certain approach or style, and it becomes very contrived, and you lose the magic behind the work, that
Yes.
that
Yeah.
that element of mystery that pulls you in, that actually makes you want to view the work, be part with that work, in the space with that work. That's all gone, because the contrived, just it's just right there in front of you, and you think, oh well, this is so forced, it's
And
rubbish.
seeing someone experiment off his own back and maybe fail and maybe do something that's maybe not in line with your group, but he's still doing it of his own steam. I think that's a lot more powerful when
Exactly.
and
It
then in
is.
the end, you come if you immerse people in an environment of healthy examples, of people who are
Hmm.
making great work, they're going to absorb that by osmosis to some extent anyway.
Exactly. None of this is pushed or forced. You must do it like
Yeah,
this. It
yeah.
has to be in this regimented way. If you do that, then you lose that ability. Well, you lose that intuitive response to the artist's work.
And
That's gone.
yeah, I think you do wound people as well. And I'm very sensitive about when I give critique to somebody, I always try and say a very nice thing about their work and try to say a good quality to it. In addition to saying, but this bit here, could be improved on a technical level, or there's something off here, particularly just
Yes.
in. I think the thing that again we need is strong drawing, and we need strong, foundational skills. That's the thing that
Mm.
because that whole tradition was destroyed. You don't have the luck of having a Klimt who went to the Academy of Arts in Vienna, where he learned very regimented styles of drawing, and that helped him throughout his entire life. He constantly
Yes.
he constantly had that to fall back on. We're dealing with people who, unfortunately, they have the standard of teaching is non-existent
Oh yeah. No, no.
to poor really these
No,
days.
it's extremely poor, and we're all basically trying to kind of mishmash and pull together skills that
Yeah.
we're having to sort of it's being held together, and it's there, but it's, of course, everyone's at different levels, and indeed, it's we all have to be able to push ourselves further. I think that's very important with our approach. I mean, you are an incredible draftsman. I could really do with spending a lot more time drawing. I mean, I spend too much time just with clay in my hands, but I should draw more. It's very important. It's really
Well,
important, actually.
I always say to everybody, you need to draw a lot, and it doesn't matter if it's
Yeah.
rubbish. It doesn't matter if it's rubbish at all. I do think drawing is kind of the foundation, but then I'd like to experiment with material. I find painting is very troublesome. I find painting to be hard, but I'm doing a
Mm.
lot more of it recently, and I enjoy it a lot. But it's hard to get it kind of like there's a lot of failure involved in trying out different things with painting, and
Oh yeah.
the structure of painting. But everyone's got their own kind of battles to fight in that regard, I think. And again,
Absolutely.
the cool thing is as well. I think seeing young people and seeing just how absorbent they are, and really how tremendous their skills can go from. They can develop from such a level. In a year, you can have somebody and he's drawing like amazingly. You see this on Twitter all the time. People post like these deviant
Yeah.
art, these deviant art things like, here's how I was drawing in 2003, and here's how I'm drawing now. It's like some amazing fucking super rendered like Little Mermaid picture or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then yeah,
Indeed.
it's being a teenager. You can, if you've got the right stimulus and the right kind of environment, you can really. That's why I never think that I never really truly worry about like you know, getting the next big draftsman or the next really skilled guy. I worry more about people with vision. I think having
This is
people
it.
fostering vision is a lot more important than fostering some kind of mechanical skill.
I'm so glad that you've brought that up, because vision is really key to all of these things. I mean, you can have an ability, you can have the métier, you can have the magic in the hands, but if you don't actually have a vision and something to focus and push forward, an aspect of a world that you want to show, to give the ability for someone to see through your eyes, just momentarily be able to see this other world and show them behind the curtain of this other world that can inspire and give energy. If it just becomes very wooden, then the skill is purely just wooden. It's like, oh, I can reproduce photographs. It's like, yeah, but where's the vision? Where's that element of imagination? You know what I'm saying? And that's
And that,
really the
that, that
key. It's
comes from things outside of art, in my opinion. I believe that comes from music. It comes from experiencing great literature. It comes from having
sure,
fucked up
absolutely.
experiences in your life, and having a rich life. I think is what fosters an artistic vision. Definitely.
It's very true. Yeah, it's important to have that. It's really, really important. It can't simply just be, yeah, I can draw quite well. I can continually reproduce these things, but it's something that we've discussed actually when talking about anatomy and stuff like that. Because people get very hung up on being able to do ultra refined and realistic anatomy, but
Yeah.
anatomy is there simply as a sort of armature that you are able to see where certain parts of the
Yeah,
body
of
and how they
course.
react, but then you hang your own vision on that armature. It's not that you have to make perfectly realistic figures. Some of the most incredible art, of the past 200 years or so, 300 years, anatomically, it can be a little bit odd, but it's the
Yeah, yeah.
expression that's put into those figures and those bodies, and that's the poetry.
It's again, it's putting the right order of, like I again, I think people. I always, if I was teaching somebody now, I'd always tell them you've got to focus on the composition at first. And for you, obviously, that's something your work always has in a tremendously strong decorative sense and a sense of
Mm,
the overall thing, right? Not the detail. The detail is something that comes very, very later on.
yes.
It's never about the detail because your work could be stripped of all the detail, even fairly minimalist as it is. It could be
Mm,
stripped of all the detail, and it still would be a very strong force. I think that's the
yes,
problem
but
with
yeah.
people like me. Unfortunately, you grow up doing you learn art by copying like Warhammer concept art or something.
Right,
You do
right, yeah.
tend to you don't really you're not looking at that for the composition. You're looking at that because that guy's got some really cool armor on or something, or this angel's got some
Mm,
amazing wings, and then you
yes.
can end up with this kind of myopic, but that can be changed. It can, again, if somebody's got skills, you can orient them in the right direction, I think, and
You can. I fully agree. I fully agree.
it just takes a firm hand, like but a kind and firm hand. That's all.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
So anyway, like so, he's talking about here that the credibility of the surrealists was damaged by the fact that they tried to adhere to this orthodoxy too much. But he says also the contrary peril is the careerist opportunities and bad faith actors take up the mantle of a dissident art movement while failing to act along the movement's main lines of artistic and political solidarity, or they actually work against them. So he talk about kind of subversive actors here, I suppose, or people who want the
Mm.
glory. And but I honestly find it a little bit hard myself to conceive of that happening. Maybe Adams has got a bit more of a bleak view on this, but I think that a lot when you're making art, it's like we have a standard here that's kind of an unspoken standard that it's got to fucking look like something. Like it's you know
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
got to look
It's got
like
to have
something,
something going on.
and it's also got to be free of what I would call like rude wignattery or political kind of
Oh, yeah,
it's got
100%.
to be free of ideology basically, in the sense that not again nothing is truly free of ideology, but
Nothing is truly free of ideology, but I know
I'm not
exactly what you
throwing
mean.
around
Yeah.
a blonde Aryan man with a massive swastika on his chest, or like some kind of like I've seen some stuff, man. Honestly, I'll tell you, I've seen some stuff online where people have like this is the new Aryan art that will smash the small hatted empire. And
Right, right.
they've
Oh
just done
God.
some really like crude stuff. And obviously, yeah, I think it would be hard because again, that is why, as I always say, that is why I have these raunchy elements and these elements which are very hard for people to kind of like emulate in my
Mm.
work, even like pornographic elements, because people are a bit scared by that sort of thing of like kind of raw eroticism, and they're like, you can't really copy a stoat stuff in a sense that it's got some. I'm not trying to toot my horn here, but there's a lot of
No, no,
stuff
I
that
see what you
is
mean.
very eclectic that goes into my art, and it can mean it's
Yes.
quite disparate, it's quite scattered. But I think that is a protection mechanism which makes it quite hard for people to duplicate or kind of take up the mantle of this art at all. But it has a
Yeah.
distinct. But people
Yeah.
always say that it has a distinct look and it has a distinct feel. It's just yeah.
Sure.
I don't want something that's easy for people to, like Adam says here, leech on board of and say, we're taking up the mantle of this now. I just think the fact is, man, that if you can draw and if you can sculpt, you're already like fucking legions ahead of
Wow.
most people
Yeah.
who are trying,
Yeah.
leagues ahead of most people who are.
Yeah, you're so far ahead of most
Yeah,
people, and just having the building blocks of those skills, you can begin to dream, you can begin to riff, you
people
can
don't want
begin
to
to
make the
really,
effort. People don't want to make
yeah,
the effort even to get to a level of you, just so they can fuck you over, or just so they can make a
yeah.
mockery of your work. That's hard to get to that level, just to fuck you over.
Certainly not easy. I mean, I think the majority of the artists today who are very much involved in the contemporary scene, I don't know how they would really approach, trying to do something on my work really,
Yeah,
apart from bringing a hammer to it, because I mean, most of these people can't make anything.
yeah, they
They
can't
they
make
they,
they can't make
they
anything.
can't make a darn thing.
Yeah,
you know.
And if we got people who maybe want to add, again, I think it's fairly easy to dispel any kind of, like this crude wignattery or this crude. I think that that's kind of a moribund style or a moribund kind of idea as well. It comes from America most of the time. Again, it's not something that really. I watched 4 5 years of people trying to make racist Nazi art on 4chan. It never went anywhere.
Yeah.
It went nowhere
This
at
is,
all.
I mean, you have more experience. I mean, you've been around on the internet a lot longer than I have, so you can speak from these positions. But I've seen a little bit of it on Twitter, and I always find it like,
It's a
yeah. I mean,
little bit
it's,
cringe, to be honest.
yeah. I look at it and I think to myself, well, you you're just sort of pushing straight into this just very kind of grotesque propaganda type approach, and it's not even good enough to be called propaganda. Actually, it's just kind of base level stuff, and it's not really exciting. It's not even that shocking. In fact, it's just sort of like,
Yeah,
well,
the shock
yeah.
factor has definitely worn off. I think that's a part of a problem as well. Like, but
Yeah, the
again,
shock
maybe
factor isn't there, and it doesn't bring anything. I just look at it, I think, yeah, so what? I'd much prefer if you spent some time really creating a true image of something deeper, something
yeah,
that's truly got some verve and some life in it.
yeah.
But these symbols, the swastika, it's a very potent symbol. You smack it onto things, you throw it onto things, and people think, oh, now I've done that. It's kind of I've made something relevant in this
And the
outsider
same,
scene. We're being edgy. It's like, no, it's not
yeah.
really that edgy
And
at
the
all.
same,
In
the same
fact,
with the obviously there's pagan runes and there's the black sun symbol and things, and these things are
yeah,
funny
yeah.
for memes and stuff. But
Yes, I mean yeah,
every time it's brought into like the real world, it just makes people cringe. Even Pepe, I've seen there's
yeah,
people make some pretty good Pepe based art. It's not
yeah.
tremendously serious, but then that maybe that travels a little bit better in the real world when again you've got to have your art. I think that's why I was going to encourage people to draw in real life as well, and to show people their work in real life, and bring it around, and
Yeah,
because things that might survive on the internet, they don't really have legs in the real world when you bring them in
it's
front
indeed
of
true.
normal reality. And I
Indeed
know people
true.
would say the internet's real, the internet's real life now, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think
I suppose there's aspects of it, but it doesn't translate, directly. Certainly, that's true.
yeah. So careerists, opportunists, bad faith actors take up the mantle of the dissident art movement while failing to act along the movement's main lines of artistic and political solidarity. So I mean, I do understand. Yeah, we have to nip in the bud anytime anyone comes along and they try and make a grift out of this, or they try and I'm sure that there'll be some salacious people then coming up to you and saying, "Do you want to fucking sell out for my there'll be some real subversives coming up to you, I think, in the near future."
I suppose that sort of thing can happen. Yeah, I mean, you've got to always be on the guard. You must be on the guard. I think that's. I have experience with certain strange individuals in the art world and and the cultural world, and I think I'd like to think that I'm sort of yeah, I'm able to avoid it, but yeah, I
It's a
mean,
test of a
I've
man's
really
morals. It is a test
yeah,
of a man's morals when again, careerists and opportunists kind of come, and they might tempt you in some ways, or they might make it feel like you're more important than you are, or whatever. You've got I think humility is very, very important. Like I always
very
try and remember
important.
that
Yeah,
I am a man from the
yeah.
gutter, um, and I like the gutter. The gutter's fine, you know.
I love the way you say that.
You,
It's amazing. It's
no, I'm a
amazing.
punk. I'm a punk from the streets, and but there will be everyone will be kind of confronted with their own kind of they will try and drive a wedge, and they will try and fracture us and drive personalities, they will try and leverage certain aspects of our personalities against one another, I think.
I'm sure that will happen, and it's happened in the past. These things generally repeat themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to just be aware and remain and keep.
You've got to have, it's something I've spoken about on Twitter a number of times. You've got to have an element of nobility to your conduct,
Yes,
and keep that in
yes.
mind. Just keep that in mind. Never keep that thought too far away from your mind.
Aristocrat of the
Have
soul is a very good kind of, again, you got to have, you got to look down on certain people if they bring in a base energy or an energy which is like low
yes,
and uncouth, or they're trying
yeah,
to turn your
yeah,
thing into a money project or whatever. You got to just spit
yes,
on them, and you got to say, I literally step on you.
yes, very important.
I'm doing something which is higher than your soul. Like someone like Andrew Tate, or whatever. I look at Andrew Tate. I said this on Twitter the other day. I said, this is a cockroach. This man is a pauper who has daubed himself in gold paint. But his soul is a rotten. Is a real like small black soul. It's a disgusting little soul he has, and he can have this
Yeah.
on all this pomp and pageantry around himself and this whole character. But he's not a high. Again, he's not an aristocrat at all. He's the opposite of that.
I mean, it's a funny one with Tate, isn't it? It's strange that he's been elevated to the levels that he's been elevated to. I suppose the problem is that he's a lot of young men are looking at him as like, oh, I want to be like him, and it's
Yeah.
just fantastic what he's doing, and he's, it. I think the one thing that you can say about the guy is he's very outspoken,
Oh,
and
of course.
he's given a voice to a certain group of individuals, certain men who feel like they've never had a voice, and for them it gives them an outlet,
Yeah.
and it gives them a sense of, oh, we're now being heard, and I get that, but if you dig down into the character of who this guy is, this isn't a noble figure.
No, and
This
he
isn't
is
like
not going to
a
propagate noble
this is not a
men. That's
no.
that's the problem. Is that
This is the issue.
I've seen the men who he propagates and who his he's a seminal figure towards. These men turn into clones of him. They affect his speech patterns, affect his ideas, and affect his attitudes. And you don't want more of that. That is the way that men propagate themselves online. That they create clones of themselves.
Yeah, it's
And those clones are doing their work for them. That's why he says, they can put me away, but my ideas will never die. Is that, yeah, because you've infected people with your ideas, and these people are now
yeah.
carriers of this ideology and this virus.
No, it's. I don't think it's the right conduct. I don't think it's the right manner to do things. Everyone has their level. One must remember, though. Everyone has their level, and he
No, he speaks to a certain
he
level,
speaks
absolutely.
to a certain level. Everyone has their level, but it's not a level that I resonate on. Let's put it that way.
There are men who can speak to men on that level, and they can talk to them about, like, oh yeah, society's fucked you over. You need guidance. You need to get money. You need to have a goal in life. You need to be confident and stuff like that. There are men who can speak to men on that level, but then the baggage he brings to it, the horrible aspect, it really
Yeah,
makes
no,
the whole of it a poison. It's a poison pill, really. Anyway, we diverge. Sorry.
yeah, we diverge. Right.
So yeah, so he's still talking here about so bad faith actors take up the mantra of the distant art movement. We dealt with that. While any movement needs to possess a degree of conformity, the trials and expulsions of the Surrealist group, with endless internal drama driven by personal animus, are not feasible in an era of cancel culture. Well, yeah, I'm not sure how relevant that idea of cancel culture is, but I fear that any artistic movement which relies on social media is at the mercy of drama queens, malicious individuals,
Oh
and
yeah.
tittle-tattles seeking to use the public channels of Twitter, YouTube, other social media to discredit fellow members, exclude rivals, seek
Yeah.
popularity, and spread gossip. Under
Yeah.
such circumstances, surrealism would have spread more widely in terms of creators and audience, but it would have failed to maintain artistic coherence. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that
Yeah.
model again, that model of orthodoxy and having a very regimented thing, is not really feasible in the age of social media. Like we said earlier, anyone can claim I am the upholder of BAP's ideas or whatever, or Nick Fuentes' ideas, and I suddenly go and do something horrible. It reflects badly on the whole thing. But yeah, the solution really to me is just is to keep it small. Is actually just to keep
Yes.
it exclusionary, keep it small. Don't put our own members on trial, because we love our own members,
Well,
and
yeah.
I wouldn't have them in there if I didn't love them or wasn't fond of them.
This is it. I mean, I'm so glad that we're aligned on this. Is that for anything of quality to ever exist, there must be that notion of exclusion. You have to have that ability to be able to say, look, we just don't need
But
a
exclusion doesn't have
mass.
to be an autistic commie thing. It doesn't have to be this kind of
No.
thing where it's like, have you said your fucking marks today, or have you read your little red book today? No, well, you're going in the gulag or whatever. Like that's just autistic to me. It's like exclusion
Yeah.
works again, it's aristocratic, it's a high-minded ideal. You're not
Yeah.
part of the group simply because your nature is not part of the group. You're
Yeah.
by your very nature you're excluded. You can't ever be
Yes.
a stoat or a fed, or anything like that.
That's
You
it.
can have
That's
your
it.
own friends, or you can have your own, your own ideas or your own art, or whatever. Build again. I always say this: build something of your own. If you're
It's very
excluded, you
important.
build something of your own and beat me and destroy me.
Well, that's it. That's it. I think as long as you run a tight ship, and you keep it tight knit, there's no reason for things to get out of control in that manner.
Yeah,
There really isn't.
and people just have to, if there's a dispute or whatever, you have to resolve it sooner rather than later. And again, I don't really.
Oh yes.
In the future there may well be some big disputes, or there may be romantic entanglements, or there may be some drama of
Yeah.
that level. But again, I've had friends in the past, and I'm sure you have as well, where the whole thing has just been drama. The whole thing has just been based around people being fucking deranged to each other.
Yeah. No, indeed. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a younger man. I've had exciting experiences, shall we say?
So he says here, yeah. So just on that point, social media makes it impossible to really make something which is highly regimented
Yes.
in the way the
Yeah.
surrealists were. So Adams, he discards the surrealist model, and I think that's good. I've never even seen anybody try to arrange things in this regard, to be honest. Like maybe some of the more like, like BreadTube or something, like with these. I don't know, that's probably something you don't want to delve into, but like some of these like YouTube creator cliques where they make a certain style of video and everybody kind of copies their, they copy the talking points and they copy the style of video, and then people get excluded and they get expelled for going against orthodoxy. You saw this happen to
Right.
ContraPoints quite a lot. ContraPoints, he said something that was against the orthodoxy of trans whatever, and that they tried to cancel him a few times. Anyway,
Wow. Incredible.
yeah, there is that, because Adams has seen this. There is this kind of like hyena like aspect where people will turn on one another, and they'll because somebody stepped outside the orthodoxy. So the point is, don't have an orthodoxy. It's a bad idea in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
No,
to
indeed.
move on really fast. Sorry.
Yeah.
So this is he's getting on now to the actual point. So he's talking about
Yes.
setting up the idea of what do we need, what are the qualities we need for this, the positive qualities, and
This
that's really
come
good.
off the ground, yeah.
I love the way Adams has framed this in terms of a list of positive qualities. So a
Yes.
protocol which might aid the distant art movement is one which allows members to promote art and ideas through publicly visible channels, but requests and necessarily enforces a code of silence regarding personal disagreements and individual clashes. Very good idea. This is difficult because artistic ideas are often deeply held by artists, in that the artist and the idea become to be viewed as inextricably interlinked. Generally, artists do not divorce themselves from principles or their past or recent work. Such breaks can be seen as admissions of failure or reversals in stance. So it seems to damage the credibility of the artist and by inference discredit the art. This is, for example, if Paul tomorrow was to say, I disregard the idea of the decorative and illustrative in art or whatever, that
Yes.
would be seen as a failure of his. But then
Yes.
if we attack that principle, he views that as a personal attack on him. But the fact is that
Yes, that's
I
right.
believe that's entirely correct, and it's a good principle to have. So I was never attacking him on that regard. We're attacking
No,
on points
no,
of
indeed.
other things.
Well, yeah, indeed. No, I mean it's
So it says in
Yeah.
a movement with disagreement about artistic issues, disputes cannot help but become personal. Because you're right. You view your art as an extension of yourself, and I do, and Paul does, everyone does. So when you attack someone's art, it does become like, oh, am I wrong in my whole worldview? Is my worldview like inherently faulty?
Yes. I suppose you see artists become so very embedded with their thoughts, and they marry their thoughts and their work, and they can become very, very close to them. I suppose the thing is at a certain point, what you could say is that you must also be able to step back from the stuff that you've
Yeah, yeah.
created,
I was going to say that actually. Yeah, yeah.
and not get too caught up in your previous works, and also be able to still say, yes, there are some faults with that. There are
Oh,
some
of
elements
course.
that
Yeah,
haven't
God.
worked.
And
There are
even that
some
I
approaches that just,
even
it's very
even that
important.
I like entirely was building this on a faulty foundation. A lot of the time when you're learning, you look back on work you made before and you say, well, that's nice in some ways, but really the underlying,
Yeah.
it's lacking in the foundational aspects.
It's about being, you've got to be got to be the professional at a certain point and say, yeah, I can look back at certain work that I've done and it wasn't quite there. Yeah, there was still some merit to it and it had something and it was working, but this didn't work and that didn't work. You should be able to detach yourself a little bit as well, and not take everything to heart.
Yeah.
When you do get criticism, there has been, many times I've had criticism, and I think to myself, well, actually, there's a certain point there, about this or that, but that's art. I mean, some art's going to resonate with people, some art's not going to resonate with people.
But that's why you
There'll
make
be,
new pieces.
you know,
That's why you go on and you make something that's better.
yeah, and you just keep going. You're in that process of constantly moving forward with your work and not getting too tied down by your previous work. I think if you can have that notion of, look, that your best work is yet to come, your
Yeah.
best work is still to be made, then of course you're going to be hungry for that next piece, that next thing that you're marching forward on. And don't get too caught up in, oh well, you did that in the past and this doesn't quite right. Don't get too caught up in that, because that will actually just that will slow you down. Look forward. Have
Yeah.
your nose pointed forward.
And look for new sources. I think a lot of the time, again, people, they get attached to ideas and they're really afraid to discard those ideas, or potentially, let new ideas that might challenge those ideas come in. And Adam's here, he's saying, art history is full of such incidents. We are unable to avoid them, but we can help by criticizing ideas and art rather than the artists themselves. So, no,
Yeah.
I never put down any fault in art of my people to any personal failing or any kind of character flaw in them at all. I view most of it as just simply a matter of drawing more, and
Mm.
you need to get in your inspiration from good sources,
Yes.
copy something that's masterful, develop your eye, and
Yes.
it's not a personal failing. Although we're not dealing with people who are like degenerate heroin addicts or whatever, like fucking
No.
or even someone like Caravaggio, where he obviously had anger issues and was very proud. And I imagine if you criticised Caravaggio's work, he probably would not take kindly to this, and he would
There's a
view it
very
as
high
very
chance
very personal.
Caravaggio.
He would
There's a very high
shank
chance
you.
Caravaggio would have shanked you.
Yeah,
I mean, you
yeah,
would have popped a knife in your
yeah,
back.
yeah.
I mean, the
He would
the
certainly have
thing
challenged you to a
is
duel if you insulted his work.
yeah. I mean, people forget. I mean, people. A number of these, artists and characters of the past. I mean, they were pretty flamboyant individuals, and a lot of people associate making art with being just this maybe feminine kind of character, and overly sensitive. Yes, there's a
Yeah,
sensitive side
yeah.
to them, but there's
But
also
also,
quite a
there's a hardcore.
ferocious.
Yeah, there's a hardcore and a ferocious side. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean,
But
certainly some of the stories about Wyndham Lewis. I mean, he was not someone to really.
to
He had a very
trifle with.
sensitive
Yeah.
side, but you wouldn't trifle with the man.
Yeah. 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 But I mean, William Lewis, as far as I understand it, he was quite a controlling personality in the sense that he wanted people to go in his way for the benefit of as he viewed it, for the benefit of English art, or for the benefit of the movement.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was having to really lead and take on that
Yeah.
leadership
Yeah.
position. And
And it was
he
a very
was he
singular
was a military
vision.
man.
Yeah.
I mean, he
That's
came
right.
from a
Yeah.
military background, so he
Yeah.
had that kind of force and ferocity in him. Although he was a very sensitive, an emotional individual in aspects too. So, I mean, there's always many different sides to these different characters and artists. I think it's just important to understand that, yeah, of course, it depends on the artist who you're criticizing. Some may just nod and say that's absolutely fine. Others might
They
others
might
might
take
get very
an
upset.
affront to it. Yeah, but again, it's got to be about how you couch the criticism. You're very good at offering criticism in ways which is I think when somebody comes to you and they give you something that's just completely not developed in any way at all. I know some people have come to you and shown you some very, very,
Mm.
very baffling things, and they say, Fen, what
Very
do you think of my
baffling.
work? And you're like, well, I mean, my 1 year old also did
Yeah,
a
I mean
drawing the other day.
it it can be, well, you see, it can be very baffling, and of course the thing is I always try to encourage as much as I can,
Yeah,
but the thing is that there can be this kind of blind overconfidence in certain things, and I'm just like, oh guys, come on.
it's hard for people
You
to,
know,
again, it's hard to criticize somebody on their own terms, I think, because everybody's dealing with a different
of
mindset, a
course,
different
of course.
history. And if you don't know the person very well, you might not know how to bend them in the right direction in some way. Online. It's like people are just crying out. They're like a drowning man, and they're
Mm,
really just like
mm,
reaching out for anything. You know, I think that
absolutely.
even if you tell them like go and fucking study this Bern Hogarth book or whatever, that's enough for a lot of people to nowadays be like, wow, he really cares about my.
Well, I always do try and say, look, hey, perhaps have a look at this or have a look at that. Or, I mean, you have to understand so many of these people, they don't have the ability, we don't have the ability to go to an academy
Mm,
again and have like that tutoring
yeah.
that you'd have from an actual master. There are no masters anymore in academies, really.
Mm,
You have teachers. That's something very different. And so the thing is now is when people come to me, if they're genuinely coming to me, because you also have to remember a lot of the stuff that people send me, it's also like half-assed, and I don't think they fully believe in it themselves. So
yeah, yeah.
it's almost a bit kind
Yeah,
of
well, they're
cheeky
lacking
what they're
direction.
doing.
They're lacking any kind of hierarchical structure to their lives. Where they don't have someone
Mm.
to look up to.
But you can point people in certain directions for certain books that they can approach, or certain ways that they can begin to render form or understand form, or even just have a have a basic understanding of
Mm,
the canon of what our traditions are kind of based on, and at least build something off of that. I think the problem that I see very often today is people will send me stuff that's inspired on anime, and it's like it's a weird one because it's like it's like
it's
cat
so
boy
baffling.
anime,
Yeah.
and so I'll be sent this kind of cat boy anime slash fascistic cat boy anime, and I'm just
Okay.
like, just don't waste my time. Just please don't waste my time. I'm not interested in
Oh man,
engaging
you
in
get you
this.
get some shit, man. Yeah, but I mean, to contrast with, I mean, our good friend Jacob, he's tremendous at if you send him in a direction, he'll really like delve into it with tremendous gusto, and he goes and he looks up his own thing. He knows so much about
Jacob is
architectural styles,
actually
and he's a
Jacob is an extraordinary young man. Actually, he
yeah,
really is.
yeah.
Very impressed with his drawing ability,
He's got a
how he's
self
pushed
motivated.
forward.
He's got a self motivated mind though. That's what's
Very
interesting.
sharp,
Yeah,
very sharp. Yeah, it's true. No, it's wonderful seeing Jacob and his push, and yeah, it's really wonderful actually. It gives me a lot of energy to see a young man so dedicated. Actually,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
great.
Absolutely. I mean, again, it's always just say to him, all you need to do really is just draw more, and and try and push yourself in the direction of maybe drawing something that's a bit uncomfortable to you and you have a bit of trouble with. Because if you're drawing something that's comfortable to you, then that's kind of already in the bag, and just keep on going, and have that
Yes.
thirst all the time. Don't let them crush. I always say this:
No.
don't let them crush it out of you, because the world will try and do this. The world will make you try and despise your own
They will
practice.
attempt that. Yeah, it's very true.
Because they don't like to
Very
see
true.
again, like they don't like to see this mercurial kind of aspect of
No,
something coming
no,
in that
no.
they can't control, or they it's like
No, they want to regiment you.
yeah,
Indeed.
yeah.
Yeah.
They want to
No,
regiment you into kind of a bland, like they want to they want to regiment you into this like certain box though. It's like it's a very like you were there. We went to St Martin's and we saw those funny art students in their weird like
Oh wow,
anime
yeah.
clothes, and
God, the St. Martin's Art School.
yeah they
Wow.
but those are people who basically have had like they've been corralled in a certain direction where you know any avenue where they might have looked at something which would have been
Yes.
something classical or something like that had a timelessness to it, they've been kind of pushed away from that deliberately, and they've been pushed into looking
Yes.
in a very blinkered way.
Oh God, yeah.
um,
It's layers upon layers upon layers of indoctrination under, this kind of, well, neo deconstructivist
yeah,
slash identitarian
They're trying to
you know,
worship their own identity, but
culture.
at the same time, they're just kind of nothing. They're just kind of like cosmopods and there's floating in. Culture just kind of existed. It wasn't built by men who fucking broke their backs. To bring you like,
So
these
true.
heroic culture. Anyway, man, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, St. Martin's was a funny thing
It
to go
was,
through,
yeah,
actually.
it was a phenomenon, honestly. But if you can survive that, I think then that's the crucible that where if you come out of there and you still want to make like fucking Palladio buildings or whatever, then you're
Well,
fucking,
yeah.
you're
I mean,
hardcore.
if you come out of an institution like that, and you still have your spirit
Mm,
intact and this alignment to actually go on
yeah,
and truly make something,
that's an
then
aristocrat of the
hats
soul.
off.
Yeah, that
That
that's
is and I want you. Call me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you've
You
been
know,
there, you've delved into that you know,
I've been through an institution like that. It was the Glasgow School of
yeah,
Art, and
yeah, that's
it
right.
was harrowing,
Yeah,
absolutely harrowing.
yeah. And you can come out of that thinking, is that really all it? Is that all it is? Is that what art is? And there's not. There's not.
No.
People can think that that's the only thing that there is. It's a big
Oh
problem.
yeah. I mean that's a real shame. I mean these people they end up going through these places and they've got nothing left in them at the end.
Yeah.
They are bankrupt.
Yes. Anyway, sorry, man. Right. So the actual points here where he goes through, right. Adams again. He's talking about we got to be making sure that we're not doing personal petty clashes based on personality things. Obviously, if
Hmm.
somebody's not gelling personality wise, then it's best not to, introduce them in the first place,
Yeah,
or
yeah, very true.
get serious with them in the first place. And if we criticise
Agreed.
amongst ourselves, there should be still a united front presented to the world, which I think we're fairly good at doing anyway. I mean, the work is so disparate that it's hard, in my opinion, to it's hard to really say, like, again, there's a strength in this kind of diversity. Diversity is our strength.
I love that. I absolutely love that. No, but it's true. But I think the thing is it comes down to a sense of conduct. If you conduct
Mm.
yourself
Yeah,
with
yeah, yeah,
a sense of nobility, a sense of being true to yourself, and a sense of professionalism, and you're serious, nothing can really go
no,
wrong.
no.
Things get out of control
If you
when
put your
when
ego in
something
front
is
of
out of
your
balance there.
work, if you put your
That's it.
ego in front of your work, then that's
Yeah,
the biggest problem, really. You've got to always,
this
if the
is it.
work is leading the way, then I don't think you can put a foot wrong, really.
This is it. This is it. I mean, it's something I've said regularly: is follow the work,
Yeah,
follow the work, but have what you're doing be about the work. Of course, I mean, yeah, sure. The artist and the spirit of the artist is in the work, but it's the work that's important. I think talking about ego as well is, my belief is that a lot of movements have not formed like the ones you're bringing together, like the one you're bringing together,
mm.
is because people's egos were too darn big,
Yes, yes,
and they wanted to be in the limelight
yeah,
constantly.
yeah,
And of
yeah.
course, when you do a group show, you're not in the limelight constantly
No,
because you're together for a higher cause. Of course, you come in and someone will see a piece of my sculpture and one of your paintings or drawings, and something of Pharaoh, whoever,
yeah.
something of Adams, and they can walk in and they'll see all that stuff and they can individually see the artist and what they're doing. But it's
But this is not an
you know
ego trip for anybody.
it's not an ego trip,
Yeah,
because you've come together and you've said we're coming together for something of a belief that's higher, and we're fighting to move forward in that belief,
yeah.
and we're tied together with that. That's you can't have that happening if you've got like a hugely inflated ego
No, no.
and you're wanting eyeballs on you the whole time. You just can't do it.
I mean, it sounds cheesy or whatever. We genuinely are trying to fight for the soul of art, and Paul Rose says this as well. And I believe
Yeah,
truly that he's invested in that. I have no. He's entirely serious when he says I am really fighting for the soul of art here, and I think that is a noble fight and a valid fight,
it's
and
a
I'm not putting
very
any of
noble
cast shade on
fight.
that.
It's a
And
noble fight, and it's beyond us.
yeah,
That's it.
and you can't
It's
again.
beyond us.
If
Yeah.
you want to be this rock star, then you've put yourself in front of that goal of the soul of art. That's not. You've put you put man before God basically in that sense.
Yeah, indeed, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. So you say, so this is now the list. So it says, bearing these qualifications in mind, so what overall principles should a successful artistic movement have? And I think that these are things we've probably touched on already. But so the first one, generosity. As individuals who do not believe in egalitarianism,
I
that is
like
to
this. I like this.
yeah,
Sorry.
baby.
This resonates with me
Woo!
immediately. Sorry.
Woo!
Sorry. Carry on.
That is to say, all things are not equal, and nor is making all equal possible or desirable. We recognise that some of us are more skilled, more original, more powerful as artists than others. We should extend to others who share our aims and beliefs and play an active part in our community on individual terms by advancing our cause or by dint of their artistic contribution a degree of generosity. So we should extend to we should extend to others who share our aims a degree of generosity. In other words, we allow in those who are committed or serious, overlooking their shortcomings as artists, while at the same time urging all to excel. This is the spirit of collegiality. I like that word. That's a great word.
Mm.
We should not publicly disparage anyone who is supporting or contributing to the movement. We must act without malice. I mean, that's that. It's just golden stuff. It's great.
It's golden rules. Yeah.
I
I
would
mean, I think
never, I would never disparage my people on Twitter, or never disparage my people in real life
never.
at all.
No.
It might make something
No.
that's not so great. I make something that's not so great a lot of the time. But it gets deleted. I don't keep it up there. But
I mean,
I rely on people just to not cuss me out or say something, because not
well, it makes
everybody's having
every
a good day all the time. Sometimes you have an off
no.
day.
And the thing is, as a team work dynamic, you're working together. If you start calling someone out, oh yeah, look what Stoat's just done. Oh, look what this guy's just done. In social conduct, people don't realize when you're doing that, you look like the fool.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
look bad.
And you're
I
showing
mean, I,
it's like a crack you're showing and that's
yeah,
what the opportunists, as Adam said earlier, that's what the opportunists and the nasty actors and people who want to drive that crack even deeper, they'll pick up on that, and they'll realise, oh, we can.
yeah,
There's an ego clash here between Stoat and Fenn or whatever. We can
yes,
work on this to
yes. We can
drive a
drive a
wedge
wedge
between
here.
them. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. That's it. I
Keep
mean,
that stuff on the.
the,
If that stuff starts to develop, it should be resolved in private. Absolutely,
must
but
be addressed in private with a duel.
but the better thing is to not let it really begin in the first place, and that does
No,
involve, I think,
exactly.
like keeping a healthy distance from each other, in a sense of you don't want to get too Again, I was a supporter of you go intensely into someone and then you withdraw and you think about it and you reflect on it.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
if you get too into somebody, I've had some very intense friendships in the past with men.
Mm.
No homo, but those became very toxic, because at the same sometimes you get too passionate with one another and you actually end up living all over one another, and you kind of you
Yeah.
destroy any distance you might have. It becomes like a kind of an obsession. You know,
Right.
and I feel
Right.
like
Yeah.
a
I
lot of
see.
artists in the past, they did have this kind of obsessive quality where they would, like Gauguin and Van Gogh, for example. I think that they had this spark between one another, but also they fucking despised each other, and they spent this time together where they basically couldn't get away from each other, and it drove them both fucking
Mm.
mental.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that I find with artists is when you have a meeting of minds and you have that connectivity of minds, which is rare, by the way, but when it does happen, it's a beautiful thing, but it's a star burning ever so brightly,
Yeah,
and
it's a
it
nuclear thing. Sometimes it's just it can create devastation.
yes, and yeah, it can go essentially go supernova. So, it's something that must be tempered and understood. But those energies between artists and meetings of minds are wonderful, and they're extremely energetic and vital.
Yeah,
And they provide huge amounts of creative energy. They're very important, but indeed, it's like you have to also have those breaks and that time where you can get away from one another, and you can digest ideas. Otherwise, it becomes very, very, very close.
yeah,
And
claustrophobic,
um,
mate.
but but I think the thing is as you mature, certainly as I've matured as a man, you can learn how to temper these things.
Yeah,
You
yeah, I
understand
agree.
that they
Yeah.
don't have to get that way
I
because
think you
you.
become a lot more beneficent when you get a bit older, in the sense
Mm,
that you view other people as your charges in a way. You're kind of like you're under my wing, and maybe I don't know everything. I can't teach you everything, but at the same time, I'm always going to be there if you need to. I have people messaging me on Discord, from
mm,
Twitter and all sorts of things, and because they know that I'll always reply at the very least, and I'll sometimes just do a straight up like drawing for them. I'll
mm.
look at their work and I'll do my best to figure out what they think, what they'd like assistance with. And that is the spirit of collegiality and beneficence, and actually being like, this. You genuinely want a rising tide to raise all the ships.
That's it. That's it. It's so important. It's so important, and you've got to keep that level of conduct. I mean, I've said it a number of times, but if you just, it's just being professional as well.
Yeah,
Just being professional,
yeah,
taking yourself to that, holding yourself at that professional light. If you can hold yourself in that position, others will too. You won't be seen as a bloody clown.
yeah. That you have to understand, friend, that a tremendous amount of people see you as a beacon and as an example, to
Well,
look
I mean,
up to.
that's I mean, I find that truly wonderful, and I hope that I can provide people, a stone, that they can find
Yeah,
some grounding on, at least.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
wonderful. That's why I'm here. That's truly why I've attempted to push into this space, and meeting your group,
yeah.
and try to really get something going, because,
And
well,
if
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 we're not doing
if
it, who the hell
yeah,
else is?
yeah, yeah. And the thing is, man, if greater men come and they surpass you or me or anyone, I welcome this tremendously. I think that
100%,
that would be the
absolutely.
work. The work is done in that way. I'm not
That
going to
would
stop
be
making
brilliant.
work.
No, no, of course, of course. I mean, like, my absolute wish is that we can find artists out there who are bloody brilliant,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we can join forces and really do something, because it's about time. It's about time.
yeah,
People are so hungry for it. It's so
yeah.
willed.
They've been
The
saying
will
it for
is there.
8 or 10 years now, really. At least,
Yeah,
at least since the Trump, the Trump age, people have been saying this all the time, and nobody stepped forward and actually started to make something at all. But they want it to happen, and you know,
there will. The thing that I find so exciting is that one of the major reasons also why I jumped into this space is because the energy's here. That's the thing. Is the
yeah,
verve and the energy is here. It's gone in the contemporary world.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not there. It's stale. But the
And you can
ground
say
here,
that. You can say that because
yeah.
you've been in that world.
I've been in it. I know it. I still frequent it. Let's
Yeah,
say I still go to the
yeah.
exhibitions. I still
And
go
the
to the
energy is
open
not
evenings.
coming back anytime soon. It's
And the
ebbing
energy
away.
is gone.
Yeah,
It's finished, guys. The time now is ripe to build another way, and that's why I'm actually also just so damn excited, and I have this unending belief that we can get this movement going. We can get exhibitions going. We can have commissions provided. We can find that, and that's damn exciting, because that's something that will outlast us, and it's something we can pass on. That's really my wish. As you say,
yeah.
you find others that you can, the young blood will pick up and push forward with, and
And I think
damn, it's
people are
it's
crying
really
out for it. That's the
exciting.
thing.
Yeah.
People are really genuinely crying out for it, not just in some weird faction on Twitter or whatever, but people
Yeah.
in the real world. I always use my sister as a a yardstick for what is
Mm.
the average person really looking for. And they a lot of people, they just fall back on something that's really comfortable, like Monet or something. They say, oh, well,
Mm.
Monet,
Yeah.
no one can disagree with Monet. But Monet in his own day was tremendously out there. He
Yes.
was really pushing the boundaries of what you could do with paint, what you could do with landscapes. The Grand Decoration, the big paintings he did at the end of his
Mm.
life, that was like a real total, like, that was a final flourish of a career where he really just pushed the boundaries like every decade of his life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, to have someone like that who's just like a solid, a real a real grounding force that people feel like they can stand on. As you said, it's
Yeah,
it's the time
yeah. I
the
mean,
time is ripe. You know.
the time is there, man. And I don't, to go back to that element of before, where there's like a large faction of people who are kind of, they almost love to lose. I'm like, look, we can do it. It
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
possible. It's possible.
They've just been they're like a beaten wife or whatever. You know, they've come to
Mm,
enjoy the constant bombardment of aesthetic rubbish, and you know
yes.
they come to love the abuse. But the
Well, that's,
time
I
is
suppose,
it is over now. You know that sort of thing is,
yeah.
you know, those
It's
people
it.
that I think that a lot of the time, as I've seen on your Twitter, you know, sometimes you have an argument with someone who's very pessimistic, and you're actually able to turn them around and say, and they're actually able to come around and say, oh well, you know, now you've actually explained to me the principles behind your work and things and why you make your work. I actually come to see it's actually, you know, not what I thought it was, or it's not a, you know, I can
Yeah.
shake hands with you, you know.
I truly love those engagements
Yeah,
because those are the ones that give me so much energy, because you have this person who's very hostile and they're
yeah.
really attacking you, and then at the end you sort of, you're like, you shake hands and you just go, wow, yeah, actually this guy is, he was caught onto something and he was sort of blinded by that, but now he kind of sees where I'm going and what I'm pushing for. There's a huge level of
There's a
respect, and
light
then you
that
end up,
comes into their eyes, you know, and
yeah,
unfortunately, man,
and
there's so
yeah,
many men who are just miserable nowadays, and that's something that every man's gone through, you know, a dark period in his life. I'm sure, you know, some people they're still in
absolutely.
one now,
Mm,
and you got to have a kind of a kindness. Again, as Adam says it, you got to have a generosity and you got to have spare emotion for those people. You can't just dismiss them. You can't just say,
no.
"Oh, fuck off." You got to say, "Yeah, I understand your pain. I understand your, you know, you're in a dislocated place in your life. You're uprooted. You're deracinated. Whatever.
Mm,
There are, you know, ways out of this all the time, but you have to find your own way out. All we can do is we can make our work. And if you know
yeah.
you come around and you realize, oh, actually, these guys, you know, they're people who've clawed their way out of something dark as well.
Mm.
I think that again is the point of being an example to other people, you know, and
The,
not in
the,
this self help way, not in this. Again, I hate this
no,
cheesy self help
no,
nonsense. You know, it's just
no,
so rubbish.
absolutely. No, I mean, it's funny because this is a funny example actually, but my mother always said if she hadn't had art, she probably would never have survived.
Yeah,
Because I think with art and with creation, it gives you so much belief. It gives you so much of a kind of belief that you can keep on going on.
yeah.
Creation is an
Well,
organic growth process, and it's something that is, if you
it's a
tap into
godly
that
thing.
energy,
It's an absolutely it's a gift that we are given by God
yes,
to emulate Him, not to surpass Him or not to be like Him,
no,
but to emulate in a small way, you know, His qualities and his properties. You know, and
that's
that's
it,
why it
that's
gives
it.
such spiritual warmth to people when they see somebody creating something that is, you know, that's why people break down in tears in front of paintings and they have a very powerful reaction to them because they're experiencing that resonance or that echo of something
Mm.
that is truly divine. You know, not to be cheesy here or anything, but
No, I know. No, it's important that people understand that. I mean, that is just the power of creation, and I think that, it's indeed true. There are a lot of young men in a difficult spot, and their life turns around when they can begin to get a sense of, real vitality from creation, because that's what it is. To create is to live.
yeah,
That's the thing, and to resonate with that energy. Listen, whether it be great poetry, great novels, great sculpture or painting, you're able to resonate with that energy, and it can make you feel more alive. you know.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the famous Picasso quote, isn't it? Picasso, where he says, "Art is the art blows away the dust of everyday life," or something like that. I think it's a fairly overused quote, but I definitely like that. The sense that you can enrich, you know, your experience, you know. But again, somebody who's can I understand what it's like to be depressed or be in a position where nothing really feels good to you. You can't really, life is not
Yeah,
in color at all. But
it's a
unfortunately, man,
horrible place to be. Yeah.
the only way out for those people is you just have to grasp onto anything you can and just slowly pull yourself up by a fucking, a gradual, a tiny little rope, and then you
Yeah.
just, you're like getting out the fucking Bane cave in fucking Batman. You try, you jump up there, you fail the jump, and then you fall on your rope, whatever. But you keep trying, and then one day you end up in the light, and you haven't.
Well, that's it.
You
That's
know,
it. I mean, I think Henry Moore said it best with a tiny quote where he said, "To be an artist is to believe in life." It's
and
very
his
simple.
work is tremendous at conveying that. You look at Henry Moore, like the ones he did of families and things, or even just the single figures, and you think that is a man who really believed in life, and he
He really did.
relished
And that
life.
life energy,
Yeah,
that life energy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's energy that goes throughout. The natural elements of the world. The things that we view as maybe separate from us sometimes, but they're not so separate at all.
No, 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 absolutely.
Especially with all this technology
Absolutely.
we surround ourselves with. But
Well, yes.
but yeah, that's I think that is important as well. Just to touch on quickly as well, like the idea of
Mm,
making physical work, I think is a lot more. It's never been more relevant nowadays. Like the art of actually getting materials, and there's something that paint can smell so nice, and it just brings you to
mm,
a state where you're like, oh, I really want to, I'm in creative mode. You have the same
mm,
thing with clay and stone and stuff. That
mm.
it's very important, rather than living in this pure like fucking world of spirit where you're just kind of a digital. It's good in its own regard, but
Mm.
don't get trapped in there and too much.
You can get trapped in, I think. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
part of why we haven't had a serious big art movement, because a lot of these internally talented people, again, they're on Wacom tablets and iPads, and they're just making heaps and heaps of digital great work, stunning work, but it just
Mm.
ends up in a big digital heap.
Yes. Yes, it's not in the actual. It's
Yeah,
not in the actual. And to actually make something in the actual in this day and age, in this world, is pretty darn extraordinary. I mean, it comes back to that thing I often say. It's like the smallest of lights shine brightly in this period of darkness, when it comes to the point of the contemporary art world not really making anything these
yeah,
days.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, very strange times, to be honest. But yeah, so the second point Mr. Adams makes here, so the qualities that the art movement should have:
Oh,
seriousness. Oh, sorry.
sorry, there was just one thing.
Mm.
I just wanted to say I do really like that he talks about individuals who do not believe in egalitarianism.
Okay, yes.
But I just love that he's put that in there.
Mm.
It was something actually that I brought up very briefly at his talk, at one of the
You did
questions,
actually, yes. Yeah.
where I was talking about this religion, which and it has become a kind of religion in the contemporary art world today,
Mm.
of this equality religion. It's like, well, everyone's equal and everyone must be held under this kind of blanket of equality.
Because
And so
everybody's work came from their personal feelings, and who are you to go in and criticize somebody's entire work? Again, it's as he said, it's an extreme example of equating the creative work with the person, because if I'm a black woman from fucking Mozambique or whatever, and I make work which is related to colonialism, whatever, if you're criticizing that work, you're essentially denying my experience, and you're
yes,
destroying my
that's
experience.
right.
Same with this
That's right.
Pakistani lady who made the figure with the strange golden figure, on top of the courthouse.
The
She,
statue on the courthouse.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of her fame was actually garnered from the fact that she got some big commissions in the 2000s. It was one of her commissions actually was taken down because of the bad associations that it had with potentially militant Islam and terrorism and things. And then she obviously used that. She used that censorship, whatever, as a springboard for her career.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah, rather extraordinary. I mean, the thing is, I'm just so glad that he touched on that, because I've it's something that I continually come back to, and I see it being preached in every aspect of the contemporary art world now, is that everyone has to be held under this equality standard. And of course, to make art, to be able to create art at the series of different levels that art is created at, is of course not an egalitarian thing. It's to hone your skill, to be able to carve stone, to be able to work with paint. It's not something that everyone can do, and everyone has their level. And
Yeah.
so to pretend that we're all on that level, or even to pretend that we're all socially or spiritually on the same level, is utter
Yeah.
nonsense. So I mean, I'm so glad that he puts that in. Of course, completely agree, and and yeah, I think the art movements, certainly the art movement that you've brought together, and alongside Adams, it should be one that does not claim this nonsense
No.
of
It
equality.
goes
That
without saying. I
is,
mean, I like the way he puts that in there as a given. As individuals who do not believe in egalitarianism, like you don't need to, you know,
bam.
yeah. But I do want to frame this quickly in a positive way, in the sense that someone who is better than you is an ideal. It's someone
That's
to
it.
look up to. And if you
That's
don't, if
it.
everybody
Yes.
is equal, who are you going to look up to?
This is the thing. I mean, it's even just to create one of the major issues. I believe that a number of my works, my larger stone works, are not put alongside the artists that have found objects on the floor, is because there's just such a towering
Yeah, there's
difference
a very
that it
great disparity there, isn't there?
that it
Yeah,
would just be laughable when opened to the public. It
yeah.
would be laughable. You wouldn't. It's not allowed. It's like it would just it would show the whole thing up as an absolute joke. Finger painting and some stuff thrown on the floor with strings and balloons around, and then you've got like large carved stone. I mean, it doesn't work.
It would also make
People,
your work look bad as well. It would actually be
it's
a
it would be horrendous, but it would also be an absolute laugh too, because you could
yeah,
then be like, well, yeah, I'm in this group show and these people are just a bunch of clowns. I
yeah.
mean, none of them have actually really made anything.
In a way that they kind of have achieved this egalitarianism that they so dearly after, because they are equal in mediocrity, in the sense that
They
they
are. They are. They are. You've nailed it. They're equal in mediocrity. This
yeah,
idea that everyone's an artist, everyone can create, and it's all fun and games, and this whole notion. I mean, I actually, Ai Weiwei, the
oh
you
yeah,
probably know Ai Weiwei. He
yeah,
came out and he was quite famous for saying relatively recently. He said, well, everyone's an artist. Everyone's an
yeah,
artist. And he was sort of claiming it in this sort of, as if he was saying something really profound. And I commented on it with a few of my friends around in public, and they were like, well, yeah, but is he so wrong for saying that? And I'm just like, guys, come on, just think for a moment.
yeah.
Of course,
But
this
if
is utter
everybody's an artist, then
nonsense.
nobody is. Obviously, I mean,
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it truly the mind boggles that such things can be released out of someone's mouth, and that people will actually just believe it
yeah.
without any questioning. It's
But to me,
extraordinary.
I mean, Fan, this is to me like it is in the kindest view of it. It is kind of misplaced nice sentiment, But then it doesn't work. It doesn't work,
I actually really don't like that kind of
No,
misplaced niceness.
no,
It's
I
it's it's
know.
trash.
I think that you've got to be cruel to be. I mean, the Victorians understood this better than anyone. I think you do have to be cruel to be kind, and I think some of the most brutal criticism is actually the most helpful to people.
Of course it is. Yeah, totally,
And
totally.
I think it's better to be an honest. Again, you don't want to talk out the side of your mouth. You got to be an honest critic. If you really hate somebody's work, like we have certain people who we're extremely vocal about not liking their work.
Indeed, that's
So
true.
um, it's a source of amusement, but
It's a source of
again,
amusement.
it's
Yes.
also us not trying to coddle this person or any of these people who make work which is
Yeah.
is substandard.
Mm,
I don't. I would love for this work to be better. I want it to be better,
I would
but
love it. Yeah,
you
true.
know, but then people want to take an easy. They want to take an easy paved road. They don't want to take the jagged, narrow path, which is often where you have to get to make something which is actually truly great.
Yeah, that's
It's
it.
painful and it's dark and a bit scary. But then
It's
you.
extraordinary. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah,
Sorry,
go on.
sorry, sorry.
No, so no. You bring up a great word. The creative process is not a comfortable feeling a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It is being in a state of pain. It's not always a state of pain, but there are moments that you have to
It's a
grind
state of
through.
struggle, that's like the
Yes.
Sukowski, he understood it as struggle, and that's I think struggle
Yes.
is you have a piece, which is
Mm.
embodies that perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, like to create is to be in a state of struggle. I mean, whether you like it or not, the painter Luke Timons, he says that the first 3 hours of his day in his studio is hell. And I found that quite interesting. He said after that it goes
Yeah,
into a
yeah.
into a
No,
into a state
I think that
of pure pleasure, and it's quite interesting because it's like, well, yeah, because that moment of starting, just to start, is a state of being ever so slightly kind of, oh, is it going to work
because you're
out? Oh, I don't
taking
know. I've
the
got this idea.
ideal, you're taking the ideal into the real, and then that often is that's what causes the pain because you're dealing now with, oh, actually, my abilities, are
Yeah.
I'm not this super genius that I have in my head. Because I think most artists they have vision that's often it's very rarely a case when a man has abilities that surpass his ideas. A lot of the time people would say, well, even these technically trained, classically trained artists, a lot of the
Mm,
time they wish it maybe came out a way, that they think, oh, my abilities are not quite matching up with what I have in my head, and that's what training is for.
mm,
That's what training your eyes for, training
of
your
course.
technique is for. But then it's always never going to quite match again because the world of thought is this nebulous world where anything is kind of
Indeed.
possible. But we are dealing with the possible here. We're not dealing with the oh, it might be nice.
Yeah,
We're
that's
dealing
it.
with
That's it.
the it will be something. It
It
might be
will
a
be
bit
something.
shit,
Yeah.
but it might be a bit rough around the edges. But it's better than
This is
nothing,
it.
or it's better than just
It
remaining a thought.
Well, and it can be damn confronting. It can be damn confronting, and I think that just to create at times and being in that state of creation is very humbling
Yeah, it
because
shows up your worst
this
foibles as well. Definitely. Yeah.
yeah, you have this idea where you think, oh, that's going to be amazing. I think this could be really, oh, that could really work, and you become almost romantic about this
Yeah.
idea, and you start putting it down, you start sculpting it or whatever, and you step back and you think, man, this is really beating me. It's
Yeah.
beating me over the head,
I'm not
and
up
I'm
to
gonna just
scratch
have
here.
to
Yeah.
keep going. And that's the thing. I find that people walk away too quickly from
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
work,
You have to have
but
attrition. You definitely have to have a
yes,
wrestle with it.
it's that wrestle, and you come back day after day after day, and you're in it every time. And it can be. I mean, I have these times where I'm working on a piece, and I think, my God, okay, I'm gonna spend a number of hours again in my studio with this piece, and it's not quite going the way I want it to go. But there is a belief that it will at a certain time if you put in that practice and that effort to keep going, because it's like a it's there is that battle where it's almost it's trying to wear you out almost. You're really trying to get the most out of it, but it's like, no, there's
Yeah.
another 8 hours or whatever
You can
that you've
tell
worked on it, and it's still not
yeah,
there.
you can really tell like someone like Michelangelo, right? Like you would think that I think a lot of people have this idea that these pieces just sprang into being, but like you
That's right.
did not see the intense, violent struggle this man
Of course.
no doubt had with all of his work. And then he had the one
Yeah.
moment of pride, where he was so proud of this work when he signed the Pietà and he said Michelangelo made this. And then that was the moment where he realized that it wasn't about the ego at all. That was him getting ahead of himself. It was really about the
Mm,
struggle and the pain. And he
yeah.
never signed anything after that.
It's I mean, it's extraordinary. You bring up a great point because, people only ever see
The
the
finished,
final
polished outcome. Yeah,
piece, right?
exactly, exactly.
And then they go, oh wow, you made that. That's incredible. And it's like, yeah, but there was so much that went into that. It was days of sitting in front of it or standing in front of it, shaking your head, going, my God, where the hell's this going? And
Yeah,
and giving yourself to the work, because you give yourself up to the work. You have to strip your ego and give yourself up to the work a lot of the time.
yeah.
You become someone just as a servant to try and bring it into being, and yeah, that process is. It's funny because I think I've certainly come across a number of people who think that just being an artist or being creative is just you're just doing your hobby
It's
or
just being
something.
or just being this big quirky personality. Like I think a lot of people think like that you can somehow sustain an artistic career by just being like an arty person, and I think that is artists they are working as hard as any laborer or any roughneck.
Yeah,
They're really there is a tremendous real artists, obviously
yeah.
artists
If
who
you're really getting into it,
yeah,
it's
not
it's
just
an
a
it's
hobbyist
an
or a
obsession.
yeah
It's an obsession that you have to
yeah
commit to, and it will defeat you if you step down and don't have the
Yeah,
energy
you
to
can't.
approach it.
Yeah, you can't be beaten by your own. Because the thing is, it always comes back to haunt you. If you give up art and you're an inherently creative person, it will come back to
Oh,
haunt you.
oh
It
my
will not let you
goodness.
rest.
Oh, I'd feel very unwell if I wasn't able
Yeah,
to.
yeah, no,
Wow.
exactly. But that leads us
Um,
to this point very quickly.
yes.
Is the second point Mr. Adams mentions is seriousness. So
Seriousness,
we
yes.
are serious. We are serious about our principles, supporting our fellows, protecting our heritage, advancing our values, sustaining our viability. That's a good point, that last one, sustaining our
Very.
viability.
Yeah.
That seriousness should extend into all areas of our public conduct. This does not mean being somber and grand and self important, but it means taking our principles seriously. One means of doing so is not engaging in the trivial of rising about banalities, be they petty personal gripes, minor matters of taste, indulging in gossip, bickering, feuding within the movement, or being prey to the passions that the Stoics warned about. By
Warn against,
becoming by becoming weak and failing to overcome our internal faults, we make ourselves non-serious as a movement, and we devalue our beliefs and our work. Yeah, obviously, it's fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah.
He's going into this. Yeah,
Yeah, he's nailing these points.
it's so interesting, man. Because I mean, I had a group of friends in my early to mid 20s, and they were just fundamentally very unserious people. Like some
Mm,
people wanted to be a DJ, some people wanted to paint a little bit, some people wanted to, I wanted to do my album covers for metal bands and stuff, and I was not really so serious about that. There were people who were
mm,
tremendously more serious and hardworking than me.
mm,
But yeah, if you're around people who are not really, they're kind of dabblers, or they're more interested in taking
mm.
drugs and drinking than actually
Yeah.
making something. And I've made a point to, you know, again, you have a nose for it after a little while. I think if you get somebody in there who's, they're kind of trapped in a world of vice, you can detect it quite easily. I think if you're a little bit wiser, a little bit older.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you know, don't be somber and grand and self-important. I mean, I think that's fairly, fairly well covered.
Indeed. Yes, I agree.
Because I
No,
mean,
he's
yeah,
he's
Mr. Adams, obviously he's encountered this on the right. Like you do have a certain quality of certain type of person who's kind of interested in pretending they're some kind of counter-revolutionary in France, or they're like trying to be a monarch of fucking, a medieval king or something like that. That they've got this. Again, it's a way of kind of living in a sort of fantasy thing where you haven't
yes.
really developed a personality, but or your personality,
Yeah.
you're afraid that you're not going to be considered like cool or interesting, so you develop this kind of like grandiose, like somber, like people see us on the right. The right has a particular problem with this, definitely. Maybe as an analog
Yeah.
on the left, where people think that they're like, just because they've read like every fucking word Marx wrote, that
You see people, you
they're
see
serious
some,
people. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, you see people on the, I mean, I see people on the left like this all the time, especially in the art scene. There's these kind of
they're just overly like
fairly,
self-important and
fairly
serious.
cringy Marxist
Yeah,
types who, I mean, it's just like, it's very LARPy. It's very, very LARPy. And, and no, it's not a good way to go. Be you on the left or be you on the right. It's not a good place to
no.
go to be in that position of larpery.
But then
You must be serious. I mean,
yeah,
you must be serious. I think if a movement like this is going to take off, you have to have serious individuals in it
yeah,
who are really going to hold themselves to a standard,
yeah.
and a high standard at that.
And that
You
that
know, it's,
comes from, again, back to this non-egalitarian idea. Which, I mean, that comes from comparing yourself ruthlessly to the greatest painters and the greatest sculptors and artists in
absolutely.
history. You got to compare yourself all the time. And try and be as objective as possible here. And that doesn't mean make
Mm,
work that looks like it came from some other era, but look at what these guys were doing, and that isn't obviously because history has shown, and history has kind of elevated these people to a status where they are looked at as an example. So you got to hold yourself to something higher than you. Um, and again, that means that there's no time for banalities. There's no time for like quibbling over some minor thing, as he says.
Well, this is the thing, because ultimately those little minor things. I mean, I see it on the political spectrum. Those minor things don't matter.
No,
What
no.
matters is the bigger picture, and moving forward, and being, being someone of action, being someone who's actually going to get shit done.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Even if
that's
it's just
important.
just anything, like it. And you look back on this and you think, wow, we actually did something. That is so
That's
much
it.
more rewarding than quibbling with somebody over something trivial and like owning them or whatever, or getting a ratio on Twitter or some nonsense. Like
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, absolutely.
and
No,
all those little
it's
quibbles, they add up in the end, and you realize that you've spent like months of your life essentially just trying to get some cheap shot over on someone, and it can be fun, and it can, like, again,
yeah,
gossip and bickering, as he says. you know Internet is a place where gossip is facilitated in every possible way. Like,
absolutely.
it's encouraged, it's rewarded, it's given. That's why drama channels exist, and
Yeah.
people
Oh
who
yeah.
follow this latest train wreck of this fucking guy. He's what's he going to do next? It's a
Yeah.
massive time sink. It's a massive energy sink, and it is a problem, definitely.
It's a distraction. It's a distraction, and it will take you off course for what's ultimately
Yeah.
the greater things that need to be accomplished
But if you
while
have
we're
something,
here.
if you have something going on, like Ven, like if you really have something going on, you naturally gravitate away from that sort of thing. Like, you're just not interested in it. You know?
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, if you've got things going on in reality, then
Yeah.
yeah, you're not going to be too caught up in it. I mean, I dip in and out of a few things, but I best not to get too caught up in it, because you want to try and actually get something really going.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean,
And
yeah.
again, I try and be, as kind and as I always try and fly the flag for our people as much as possible. And
Mm,
and the little man as well on Twitter. I'm big about trying to promote people who have just started drawing, or they've got some potential, even if they've only got 100
mm,
followers or whatever. Those are the people who I enjoy interacting with the most on Twitter, I think.
absolutely.
I don't enjoy
Absolutely.
engaging with the latest, Nick Fuentes says you're not allowed to have sex with women or something. It's like, I don't know, like, fucking whatever, whatever the latest trend of nonsense is.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, no, it gets a bit silly. It gets a bit silly. We can't be caught up in those things. If we're trying to achieve things in the real world, those elements can't be taking up too much of our time.
no, no,
Um, no, absolutely, I
seriousness.
agree.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Number three is ambition.
Mm,
So we need to overcome ideas, individuals, and institutions that are discredited through the force of our courage and achievements. This is just fantastic. This is just written so
yeah,
well. He's
yeah.
a fantastic writer. He doesn't mince words at all.
No,
I
no, he
like
certainly
it when
doesn't.
people do not mince words. We cannot
Me
be
too.
complacent. We cannot be complacent with regards to superiority over others. This means guarding against repetition, laziness, and rote responses. We have
Mm,
to challenge ourselves to do better and constantly strive to lift ourselves and others in our movement by working harder, knowing more, sharing information, by being generous, and seeking to apply our discoveries, or rather, as perennialists, that should be rediscoveries, to more areas.
mm,
So fantastic point.
absolutely.
I mean, that covers a lot of the stuff we were saying earlier about having a higher, like
Yeah,
always trying to be striving towards, if you love Michelangelo, then you can't just be
yeah,
good as him. You need to beat him. You need to actually say,
yeah.
well, I'm going to really do my absolute best to surpass this guy.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Because
No,
that's
it
that's non-egalitarian. You don't just be as good as him. You want to beat him. You want to actually, like,
yeah, you've got to have something that you're striving for, that ambition, that will, that absolute lust to go on and create something
yes,
truly brilliant. That's of the utmost importance in these times, and I think that Adams really nails. I think the thing that I'm really getting from this actually is just there's a really cut and dried approach to like just conduct, just being and conducting yourself in the right way.
yeah.
It's right conduct that he's talking about here, and it's
And I think he's talking to people who he knows will be receptive to
yeah,
this. I think that he's not trying to herd a bunch of rowdy 19-year-olds who are more interested in whatever ridiculous discourse point of discourse is happening,
Mm.
or trying to make the new fourth Reich or something like that.
Oh God, yeah,
He's
yeah.
talking to people who are receptive and have a depth of intellect and kind of a quality of. I imagine, I don't know Alexander Adams very well at all, but I feel like he is quite an introverted person, and he's somebody who's internally he's a very rich world. Internally, he's quite self-reflective, and he's
Yeah.
trying to impart upon others a lot of these reflections that he's been having in his own way, and then he brings it to
Mm.
when I think that this was inspired by doing the talk and seeing that there were people there who actually were potentially very fertile ground for these principles.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think so indeed. Um, I got a lot of energy actually out of the brief conversation that I have
Mm.
had with him. He's a serious man. He's a serious man, and he's put. I think you're right with saying that he's sort of digested these ideas. He's thought quite heavily on them, and he sees where a movement and a position of artists could go. But it's that understanding that there's going to need to be an elevation
Yeah, yeah. You can't
of
be
ability and
comfortable.
standards.
You can't be comfortable where you are at all. I mean, like,
No, completely agree.
and I mean, you're obviously doing a very conscious moving in style and in scope and in ambition in your own work. And
Mm,
I think again that
yeah,
is an example to other people. It shows that
yeah,
you're not just a one trick pony. You could create a dozen more works that are just like Breakthrough or just like Momentum, and people would probably clap and be very, very receptive to that. But again, it's not
yes,
about giving
no,
red meat to it's not about what they call on Twitter posting coal, where you just post
right,
the most. This is a phrase where you mean you're just posting like the most obvious like red meat take that everybody can agree on. Like, oh yeah, I can't say this on YouTube.
right,
Sorry, don't don't worry about it. I can't say
right.
what I was thinking. But no, it's just like posting like extremely like you've got an audience and your audience is going to clap and cheer whatever you do,
Right.
but
I
it's not
see what you
it's
mean.
it's not about that. It's about surpassing yourself. It's self overcoming.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
Nietzschean in the realist sense, not in some
Yeah.
machismo thing, but it's a sense of self overcoming. And actually, because Nietzsche, he believed that every man had the potential to be better.
Of course. Yes. And it's that striving and that pushing forward. I mean, it's exactly as you said. I mean, my works previously at my solo show Breakthrough, I would hate if I just
Mm.
continuously kind of knocked that style and approach out. I mean, now it's about taking aspects of futurism and vorticism and blending it with some of the more refined elements of Art Deco and synthesizing a potent and another step forward, another evolution in what's going on. I mean, I think it's very important that artists continue to evolve. You don't just
Mm.
get stuck in one approach and way. I mean, ultimately, what we're engaged in now are aesthetic questions. We're making work that's carrying aspects of tradition in the past, but it's accelerating it forward into hopefully an organically sort of new fertile growth.
We're constantly reckoning with the past, and actually, as he says here, in terms of rediscovering things, I think as we grow in knowledge and we do have this thirst for knowledge, as I see in younger people like Jacob, where you're tremendously interested in really creating a cosmology for yourself, and you're actually
Mm,
enriching your own internal world by discovering things about the past and by discovering things about the present as well.
hmm hmm
And that doesn't ever stop. That process that goes on
Never
for
stops.
it goes on until you
Never
die,
stops.
ideally. Yeah.
That's the whole wish. Yeah.
But yeah, having that ambition. I mean, I think even as a mature artist, even as someone who's looked up to as a venerable figure like Monet, he still had tremendous ambition. He was doing his most ambitious work, these vast, these canvases that were bigger than anything he'd ever done, but he could barely see, or he definitely had some
Ah,
eye problems. But he was, the ambition was growing, even as he diminished in ability, and it diminished in, he found it harder to work as he got older. But the ambition, but his spirit was just vast and magnificent.
Yes. Yes. No, absolutely.
You often see this
Absolutely.
with artists towards the end of the, as they get through their mature phase, they do things that are grander in scope or grander in spirit in some way.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Bowman by Antoine Bourdelle,
Mm.
the sculpture that I'm talking
Oh yeah,
about, the
that's
one that
one
I
of your most treasured ones.
yeah, I mean, he made that later in his life, and it's an extraordinary work.
I think that work it speaks of a complete self confidence and a complete he's really like rolling with everything he's learned. He stepped out of the shadow of
Mm,
Rodin like completely,
yeah,
and he's just that this that's just like a tour de force of like everything that
yeah,
he's put together throughout his career.
it really is.
And it's
It's
not it's
such
not
a
overdone. It's not underdone. It's just showing like raw. It's got raw
it's a
energy to it.
it's a master work by Bourdelle, and it just has that absolute vitality captured for all to see.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I reference it quite a bit on my Twitter because I think
Mm.
it's just such an important work.
Like there, that's a work. That's a
Um,
work that you yourself, again, you model a lot of your, striving towards creating a work of that
yeah, I mean,
level and that potency.
I dream, I dream of one day reaching that level. I still have time. I mean, I'm in
Mm.
comparison to when he made that work, I'm still a young man. So, but he's, I still have some more time to be able to
But
reach
again,
such brilliance.
if you maintain that constant desire to strive higher, a work like that, I think it does naturally just come in the end. And you might not
Mm,
quite realize that you've made it, but then after it's done, you're like, yes, that was the work which my ambition culminated in.
yes,
Yeah. Anyway,
yes, absolutely.
fantastic point again. Very good. We're getting through it.
Yeah.
Number 4, solidarity. So this might be called conformity or in-group bonding. We are aware of the tendency of those who wish to dissolve concerted opposition to use hyper-individualism as an ideal to atomize the
Mm,
core of a potential rival elite. Wow, that's fantastic. To ensure we advance our values, we expect that anyone in the movement either publicly support or not oppose those values. That can be judged through the artist's work or his public statements. The movement retains the right to dissociate itself from individuals who do not conform to this. This may or may not be made explicit publicly. And I mean, I'm obviously, more. I adhere to this principle implicitly, and everybody who knows me knows that I am, a gentle tyrant. Basically, I don't like,
mm,
I don't tolerate anything that is, to me, is unsettling. I don't like anyone harshing the vibe, really. And but I'm not very direct. I'm not a very direct person, as you know, and I would, you know, I like to nudge things into a more pleasant, congenial atmosphere
sure.
rather than
Yes.
completely causing a ruckus.
No, no, I
But I
totally
love
understand.
again. I love bonding people, and I love people getting like to rely on each other and getting people, because that there is a problem, of course, of hyperatomization, and
Hmm.
you feel like you can't rely on anyone. You can't rely on even your own parents or your own siblings or anything like that nowadays. Like
God, yeah,
because
yeah.
everyone's their own person and everyone's like.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's an extremely claustrophobic position to be in, I think, for a lot of people because it's that quality of being is just not there. I mean, people are kind of lost, floating, as you say, atomized. They don't know their ass from their elbow, and you can't really rely on anyone in today's age.
Yeah, and you do see as well that you see a lot of examples as we've gone through, of toxic in group bonding and bad in group bonding where like these, particularly in like the manosphere or whatever,
Mm,
there is a lot of this fake bonding or fake kind of like hazing almost, where they try and like get people to conform to a certain like group thing, like you see in like incel groups or whatever. There's a whole Creole like language where if you don't know this term or that term, then you're known as a normie or an outsider or whatever.
right.
And they enforce this quite rigorously, and you know if you don't learn to meld yourself into that group, then you won't be accepted. But obviously there's good examples and there's bad examples of that, but
Yeah.
a lot of it is bent towards quite, in my opinion, malevolent ends. I think.
Oh goodness, yeah. I think so. I think so. no, it's not the best way to go about things, I don't think.
But yeah, publicly supporting one another, obviously that does go without saying. And I mean, but then that's another important thing I think about real life meeting. I was like, I consider people who I've met in real life far more likely to bat for me if I ever came under fire.
Mm,
I don't know if
certainly,
you feel the
certainly.
same way.
No, no, no. I completely agree. Just the meetups in London and different locations and stuff. It's a far deeper connection that you get with people, obviously,
Hmm.
and it's interesting knowing their online entity, but then when you meet them in real,
There-
it's like yeah,
There's only just so
everything.
there's only so much you can do to like bat for a guy, like, or to stand on a guy's corner, uh, when you've only really interacted with him on social media.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
And
It's like they don't fully exist.
yeah, yeah. Not to say you can't, really love a man, or have a great respect for him, but again, it's the quality of your friendship or your relationship changes when you have, that physical aspect to it as well. Definitely, I
It
think.
certainly does.
And when
Certainly
you're
does.
doing a
Yeah.
show, when you're doing anything, like
Yeah.
it becomes real. That's all. But yeah, that's why it's important. That to me is a real form of bonding. And just
Absolutely.
looking a man in the face. As we saw over the COVID era, it's
Yeah.
tremendously dehumanizing to have to look at a man through a screen, and all you experience of him is a moving picture. Because there's so much more. There's so
Indeed.
much more to a man than that. Than
Yeah.
just that.
So true. So true. Yeah. God. What a time.
Yeah, yeah. And that was an era where hyperatomization like kicked into overdrive.
Overdrive.
Yeah,
Complete overdrive. Yeah. It was surreal.
it was
Truly surreal.
pathologized. To go near someone was pathologized, and I think that impact is probably still having a psychological effect on so many people. So many
Oh no,
people.
I mean I notice it still today. People are still kind of weird with each other
Yeah,
from that. It's like a
yeah,
kind of trauma that's
yeah,
like now built into them. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah. And again, movement reserves the right to dissociate itself from individuals who do not come with this. Again, like I think that I'm more on the side of not doing this kind of like public disavowal thing or whatever. I think that if you are moving in the right direction, then the flotsam and jetsam will naturally kind of just fall away.
Yeah.
And
That's
you
it.
you've got to have a stoic view on these things where like somebody may try and insinuate themselves, and they might try and drive a wedge between you, but you've got to just draw up the ranks like fucking Leonidas, and make a really solid wall. Everybody's internally agreeing and saying, "Well, no, this person's anathema. We're just not gonna entertain them. We're not gonna deal with them." And
No.
I have people where I trust them enough that they would put up a front. I think, or they would put up a solid wall of
Yeah.
agreement.
Certainly.
But
Certainly.
that
No.
will
No.
deepen it as we have more experiences together. That will deepen, and that will
Yeah.
obviously there will be challenges. I understand that there will be threats
Mm.
and there will be challenges.
There will be for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, we'll get through these. Sorry, number 5, quality. This is the hardest principle to enforce, as it
Mm.
requires a high level of discrimination
Mm.
as well as personal tact and compassion. Although, according to Principle 1, we should welcome those makers who express solidarity and conformity, we must also exercise judgment that requires us to exclude, postpone, defer, and omit. Very good, yeah. We
Mm.
must demand that the arts of our movement achieve a certain threshold of competency, ingenuity, truthfulness, integrity, and compatibility with our values. That's a very good point. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we should
Certainly
not
true.
we should not be afraid to refuse submissions to public displays or publications, while at the same time appreciating the effort and commitment of the makers who fail to reach our standards.
I completely agree with that. I mean, that's something that's very important because if you're going to do a group show, you're trying to put in the best works. You're trying
Yeah,
to put in everything
yeah,
that's elevating one another,
yeah.
and it's all strong work. It's all the best work that you can do. And of course, if someone's not quite hitting that ability or that standard, then of course you have to be able to honestly say, look,
Mm.
it just doesn't quite fit. It
But I
just
think
doesn't
you
quite fit.
you have to have associated with people who are able to understand that as well. I think that
That's true.
If you have
That's
people
true.
who can understand that on an intrinsic level, then they're never going to be offended um, if you say that at the moment we're not going to show your work or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. It's just not
Again,
quite there.
it comes
And
from not taking
yeah.
it personally when you're critical of somebody's work.
But it's also important to say that you frame it the other way too, that they understand that it's also protecting them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's a thing that it's something that I found with galleries is certain galleries won't display a certain artist's work, or in the past this has been the case at least, because it's a sense of protection. It's like, look,
Yeah.
we don't believe this work is your strongest, and I think it's better that it's not seen and brought out in the public in this sense.
Well, that's the power of good curation, man. Like, I think
Absolutely.
everybody should, I think, develop their eye as a curator, even if they're not. That's a skill which you should have in your quiver, along with traditional skills of draftsmanship or whatever. You
Yes.
should be able to collect art and put art together. Like Monet and Klimt, whatever, they collected Japanese prints and things, and I'm sure that they treasured
Hmm.
those things, and they selected ones which they felt resonated with them and would provide an inspiration to them.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's very important. Curation is extraordinarily important. And then, of course, the display, how you bring all that
Yeah,
work together.
yeah,
It's the lighting, the way it's displayed, the way the spacing, the way
yeah.
the exhibition has some element of perhaps a narrative
Mm.
to it.
I know you've been
All of this is
maybe a little displeased in the past with the way the galleries have been limited in some ways with presenting your work, and
That's right. It's one thing to understand that if a work is not displayed correctly, you can kill it. And how
mm,
do you kill a piece of sculpture? Well, you don't put it under particularly good light. You don't put it on a particularly good plinth, or even just the viewing height is not
yeah,
correct.
yeah, that's a
All of
very good
these
point.
things have to be taken into to account, because one must also understand what is the best height to view a work of a piece of sculpture, for example. What height was it conceived at? What height does it need to be viewed at? What height does the viewer's eye read it at its
Mm.
strongest potential? That's all of these things are very, very important, and it's a skill within itself.
Oh, I definitely agree, man. I mean, but then everybody should try and foster a critical eye and an ability to, even if they don't necessarily work in that field, they should be able to say like, oh well, I feel this fits in here and this fits in there. This is
Mm,
because sometimes there's people who come out with things that really surprise me. I think, oh, you've made a
sure,
fantastic point there. Um,
it's true. Yeah, I
but
mean,
it's
you can
it's
also, yeah.
it's fostering an atmosphere where people feel comfortable enough and they can actually, say that and they can give their opinions on things, and I can rely on
Hmm.
people to give their honest opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, all of these things like curation and putting an exhibition together, and taking the time of how it's framed or putting it on the wall, or how what work it's maybe put next to, or all of these things
Mm,
are kind of lost in our day and age, because of course these principles have been disregarded. This
mm.
idea of, well, everything's relative and it doesn't really matter how I display the work. I'm displaying it like this because, well, these standards are somehow oppressive.
Well, a lot
You
of people
have this kind of
don't
narrative.
even frame paintings these days. I mean that is
Well, sure.
it's
I
quite
mean,
shocking.
a lot of sculpture, or supposed sculpture, is not even put
It
on a
just
plinth.
sits on the floor. Yeah, yeah.
And there's a philosophical aspect to that, because they say that the plinth, here we go, the plinth is considered hierarchical, and so the idea of having a plinth in a space is hierarchical, and when you put it on the floor, you are sort of you're putting it
It's
on
a
the
level
level at
playing
which you
field. Yeah,
walk.
yeah.
So it then comes down to this spiritual thing that the sort of the left or the contemporary art world are playing with constantly, which is, well, you must all stay under this equality blanket.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes deep. It goes very deep. It's very esoteric.
Mm. See, there is a second little bit to this here where he says, yeah, so we should not be afraid to refuse submissions to public displays or publications, but at the same time appreciate the effort. But this may be ameliorated by having different levels of participation in public associations. For example,
Yes.
members, invitees. So I mean, obviously, in my server, my group, you don't get in unless I put you in there. That's
Mm.
it. You're not allowed, no one else is allowed to invite anyone.
No.
That's all.
No, I like that rule.
Yeah, and I mean that already gives you kind of. I mean, I'm very open to people who come to me and they say, "Oh, I think this person would be good," and I would sometimes consider that, if but it always has to go through me. Like there's no,
Mm. Well, no,
you
because
know,
you have a kind of understanding of how everyone's going to fit together, and
yeah,
you're bringing together a kind of jigsaw piece of how this how everyone's fitting. And certainly, I like that you spend the time to kind of vet and see, is this kind of going to work? Is this gonna
yeah. And the
gonna
vetting never stops. I think that
add?
even if you're in there, you're still being vetted all the time. I don't want to make
Yeah,
people paranoid or
yeah.
scared, but you're literally you're always being vetted. You're not going to get access to the inner sanctum of whatever. That I mean, everyone has to. I know that everyone has their own little personal DM groups and things on Twitter and their own, but
Mm,
and then you have a public thing, you have public followers and stuff like that. I understand that that's common, but I think being it more formalized, and again, I've always very much conceived of this as it is a hierarchical kind of organization.
absolutely, it has to be.
But there are
Has to
people
be.
obviously who are co-equal to me in so many ways, and better than me in many ways, that I defer to, as essential parts. But they're not the
Mm,
leader. They're not someone who is the the don here.
no, absolutely, absolutely.
But again, you reserve the right to exclude anybody, and I think that's great. And I think anybody who makes their
Very
own
important.
group like this, who is like a parallel group or anything like that. I mean, I'm not talking about our group as being the be all and end all of anything at all. I think if
No,
you make a parallel
absolutely.
group, but I think it would be wise if you did adhere to these standards, because I can
Mm,
tell you from experience it's been a success.
absolutely.
And
No,
there's been
indeed.
very little in the way of bumps, really, in the grand scheme
Mm.
of things. Um,
How long have you had this group together now, Stoke?
it was made in November 2017.
Well, there you go. Good
So
God.
it's actually coming up on 6 years this year. So
Mm.
yeah, so we just did the fifth birthday last November.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, obviously, 5 years. You think, well, that's it's not really a tremendous amount of time, but on the internet, holding people from different
Yeah.
corners of the globe,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It's quite something.
really lovely people. Like just the warmth and the kindness of interactions that I've had is it's a constant source of inspiration and joy to me, really.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I can see that.
But yeah, the quality, I mean, yeah, so we must cultivate discrimination and connoisseurship through a body of published criticism. And Mr. Adams obviously is very good at publishing things. I mean, I think that would be great,
He
if we
is.
if we did have a publication and things going on. Me and Ferro have talked about
Yeah.
this. So
He's
publications which share the best art that we can produce and will help to broadcast our standards and raise the bar in terms of production. I think again that's a
yeah.
fantastic point.
Very, very important. Very good point. And I do believe that Adams is rather, he does find it important that there is some understanding of the canon,
Yeah, yeah.
on
Well, that's
which
where
you can.
connoisseurship comes from. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
You're not a connoisseur straight out of the womb, or having studied, whatever fucking, if all you've looked at is like Young British Artists or Damien Hirst or something, you're not going to
Yeah.
have a qualification to say, well, this Rubens
No.
is good and this Rubens is
No,
poor.
indeed.
You know,
No, indeed. I mean, you need to have that understanding of the canon and the tapestry that has been laid before us, on which you can understand, because everything that we are doing now, of course, is connected to that.
of course,
It's
it's part of a
it,
continuum which is still alive. Believe it or
that's
not.
right. It's part of that continuum,
Rumors of the
and
death have been greatly exaggerated of art.
indeed,
Yeah.
you're still connected to that. Of course, the contemporary world has done away with the canon, and they've
And they're
tried to
actively
occult
trying
the
to,
canon,
yeah, they're actively trying to undermine and
undermine the
denigrate
canon. Yeah,
the canon. Exactly.
but of course, we are not completely, well, totally caught up with that notion, so we understand that the canon is very important, and
Well, the canon doesn't die so easily. That's the thing. It's like
no, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. So
I think that
I'm
they.
glad that Adams is very, very much on that, and I think of course, you must always look back at the canon and understand where you stand and what you're pulling on. What strings are you grabbing
Because
at?
there's power,
To
there's tremendous
yeah.
amount of power in being a connoisseur and actually having good taste.
Yeah.
regarding your own work and other people's work around you, and
Hmm.
also how that fits in and that slots into an overall continuum of art. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So important, so vital, especially in these times.
Yeah, so it helped to broadcast our standards and raise the bar in terms of production. So that is something I would like to get going this year, at least the end of
Mm,
year roundup, pamphlets, magazine esque thing. Ferro and me were
yeah,
talking about this, so that's definitely a
I think
practical
that's
point
I
on
think that's a
that.
good idea.
Yeah, and it's just so much fun just to see people's work printed and in a real publication.
It is.
I would
It
like
is.
to give each work, because the one we made, it was quite cramped. It had, because you were trying to show as much people's work as possible on each page. But
Yeah.
I definitely like the idea of having, space for the work, and you have a poem by Columba or a Panama Hat or something on
Yes.
a facing page.
I think it's so great to bring poets
Mm,
and people who are engaged in writing and stuff like that. It's so important to bring that together with visual art and just to have a real coming together of different minds of different disciplines. It's
yeah, it's a
vital,
joy.
so
Yeah,
important.
yeah, absolutely, man. Right, we're nearly there. So 6 months independence. The movement must resist the interference of the state and quasi state actors such as
Oof.
organisations, charities, NGOs, large corporations, lobby groups affiliated with the state. So, as I discussed regarding the setting up of an arts venue, funding or representation in decision making by such bodies makes a movement vulnerable to overt leverage
Mm.
or covert subversion. Oi, Gewalt. Finding Funding should ideally come through blind trusts, anonymous donations, crowdfunding, and commercial activity. Large donations should come without any conditions other than providing for publications, exhibitions, documentaries of a high standard. We should aim to establish our own channels of dissemination wherever possible and act with generosity and allow orthodox newcomers to access these channels. So, I mean, yeah, obviously, tremendously practical points. I've always been a fan
Very.
of massive, like, financial transparency when it comes to that sort of thing. Like,
Yes.
um,
But the thing is this comes back to what we were talking about before. I mean, there are going to be certain entities, financial entities,
mm,
that can come in and derail certain movements or derail certain artists, and say, look, we'll put this amount of work and money in, but we want you to make work about this, or we want you to make work that's centered around that, or we want
mm,
this philosophical input, or we want this write up to be addressed. I mean, I know how it operates. I've
yeah,
seen this stuff in the
yeah,
real world. Just to give you an example, I recently turned down an exhibition, large exhibition, by the way, where my work was going to be put in certain parts of the city here.
mm,
And it was going to be about, I mean, there was like a list of different things. It was like, it was against white supremacy. It was against, it was like for the refugees. It was like this whole political charade of stuff. I mean, it would have been amazing from a point of view, like you would have gotten massive exposure.
yeah.
But you see how the arts are used to push petty politics.
But it's the price of your soul, exactly. That's
It's
how much does
horrendous.
your
It's
soul weigh?
horrendous.
Yeah,
And so I just had to turn it down. I thought, my God, the last thing I want to do is to be behind this nonsense. And again, just art being used as a leverage system to be able to essentially just piggyback political ideas on.
mm,
And I think that's something to absolutely be avoided. If money comes with some kind of political, yeah, but it has to be about this, and it has to say, from either side, you have to be able to say, look, I'd rather not participate. It really needs to be about the art, the philosophy of the art, the
yeah.
power of the art, and the power of the culture. It's not about pushing petty politics. Definitely not petty politics. Good God. I mean,
Yeah, I
really
mean,
need to avoid these things.
Mr. Adams obviously he knows full well because he wrote the pamphlet about the Arts Council. They have obviously had their what's the word? They've had their ears, their ear twisted with certain incentives and certain, powerful financial
Indeed.
donations and things to promote a certain line. Of course,
They have to promote a certain line. It has to be this certain religion of equality. And it's really just about shaping. All they're doing is simply shaping and nudging politics
Mm.
and culture. That's all it's about.
Yeah.
And I think if your art is made on that, it's not going to last. Ultimately, you want to leave something behind that might actually last and
Mm.
add to the canon, and not just be, you know,
Swept away
put
in
into a
this
little,
political
yeah,
sewer, basically. Yeah,
swept
yeah.
away as just, oh well, they did that at that time, and it was just a bit of, petty political art. That's not something I want to have my name on. No, thank
Mm.
you.
It's very interesting, actually, man. Just quickly again, another Klimt story. So Klimt, obviously, very famously, he was commissioned to do the faculty paintings, which are the famous medicine, jurisprudence, and philosophy. And those paintings were
Mm,
destroyed, unfortunately, in a fire. But he did these very large paintings, and he was paid by the state to do this, by the Austrian state, and they obviously expecting of him a certain style of art, and they were expecting him to present these faculties of the human intellect in a certain light. And
mm,
he himself was not interested in doing this at all. He wanted to do something that was, again, it was a lot more kind of based around his own internal kind of world and his own conception of these things. And
mm,
they were very affronted by the pictures he presented to them. They were like, "Well, what is this going on?" He's presented this as, he's not glorified the institution of medicine. He's almost made it into this kind of worrying and scary thing, which obviously played out in history as correct.
God,
Um,
yeah.
but Klimt, he encountered tremendous trouble with these commissions, and in the end, he actually ended up giving back the money, the whole of the money,
Mm,
to the state, and he said, "Fuck you," basically, and my paintings are not going to be on the
incredible.
ceiling. Um,
Well, it's a beautiful and brave
yeah,
move
yeah,
because
yeah, because
honestly,
they
I,
tried
I
to
think
bend him
many would.
to their their
Yeah,
idea, but he said, "I'd actually rather rely on private patrons," and they funded him. These rich Jewish fellows,
mm,
including the Bloch Bauers, where he did the painting of Adele.
mm-hmm.
Um, and in the end, he kind of this signaled that he was done with essentially public life and done with being this guy who the state basically promoted as their golden boy. Um,
Yeah.
and that goes to show that the power of these people to withdraw their support from you as soon as you do something that they don't like,
Oh
and
yeah.
that you know you do something which is your own passion, they immediately say, "Oh, you're out on your ass now," whatever.
Absolutely. No, no, absolutely. I think if you're an artist and the problem is, I've said this a number of times before, you end up just becoming some kind of prostitute
That's
to
right.
the
Yeah,
to the system. And if, they say, look, we'll give you 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000, whatever, but you have to dance like a little monkey on
yeah, yeah.
stage.
And we
And
withdraw this. There's the threat of, if you don't continue to play along to us, we will withdraw the support, and we'll also cut you off from other people as well who
yeah,
might support you too.
I mean, it's
It's best not to get
apart
in that situation in the first place, in my opinion. I think that's
it's
probably,
honestly best to just
yeah,
avoid these nefarious money people who are going to try and push this sort of nonsense on you, and understand that you're here now. Maybe you're here once, let's say. Don't be in your deathbed looking back and saying you sold
yeah.
yourself
I
out.
sold out. Yeah, exactly. Nobody was. Nobody ever died a contented man thinking, "Yeah, I sold out."
Yeah, I mean, it's just no. You don't want that. You don't want that. No chance.
But yeah, I like the idea of I like the idea of what Adam says here. Obviously, of funding should come from blind trust, anonymous donations, crowdfunding,
Well,
and
this is.
promotional activity.
I mean, this is the thing. You see, is just to quickly sort of
Mm,
like build a basic image here is my understanding of how this could work really well is, I think we briefly touched on it earlier on, is that you have certain individuals who have the capital to sort of get into a position of patronage to build up and fund certain shows or certain commissioned works or
mm,
whatever, certain events where your work can be there, and it's done out of the love for culture and for reviving, or let's say igniting another way. I think that's
mm,
very a very noble position for someone who can get involved in that, who has the capital to do that, or even groups of individuals who have the capital to do that. You know, there are these people exist. I mean, it can happen. It's not out of the realm of
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah.
This is all possible. But we always need to know, is there a is there some kind of tag to
Is
that
there a
money?
devil's deal? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the thing. And I think it's great that he brings this up because again, movements can be derailed very quickly, and
yeah, yeah.
if you don't
Especially
have
when large
your,
sums of money are involved, and people's real
especially,
character, I suppose, is revealed when
well,
large sums
that's
of money are
it.
involved.
That's it. I mean, it wouldn't be hard for some artists who say, "Well, I need the money.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really need the money." It's like, well, yeah, but you're about to do a deal with the devil, and think about that. Just think about that very carefully.
It's
And
interesting.
I
He's very specific here as well about the state is the bad. The state is the real, because I think he has this understanding that we all do intrinsically, that the British state is hates the shit out of you and wishes you
mm,
would wither and die, basically, and that they'd be
absolutely.
perfectly happy if you expired, and
They'd be very pleased if you
your
weren't
house and
there
your
to.
properties and everything were left to them, and they just yeah, they'd
Yeah, no,
love that.
they don't want you to exist,
Mm.
and to even show another way. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think Adams is aware of as well is that what can happen is if you do start gaining momentum as a group, as an arts group, the state can sort of step forward, hands rubbing together, and say
Yeah,
to you, "Well, we'd like to kind of, we think you're relevant, and we'd like to kind of bolster you and prop you up." You have to at that point in time just say, "Look, not interested
yeah,
at all,"
yeah.
because you know that, of course, state funding on this is always going to come with certain clauses and little bits of writing that you're going to have to read very carefully.
And it doesn't happen immediately. That's the thing. I think a lot of people don't realise that a lot of these institutions, they were subverted not by one singular grand donation, but over
It's a gradual,
insidious. It was a very insidious,
insidious, yeah,
slow process where they wormed their way into people's wallets and into and
absolutely,
made them dependent on them, and then you don't even really
absolutely.
notice that your organisation has
No,
been somehow subverted.
it's very easily done, and it's a drip kind of thing. It starts out, oh well, we'll accept this, and then
Mm.
it's, oh well, we'd like to do some media, okay. Then the media comes, oh, but we'd like to have this line and this story,
Yeah,
okay, right. Then
yeah,
you give them this story, and then but we'd like to make a small publication, but it has to be about these principles, and before you know it, you're caught up. You're caught up in it. It's
yeah.
it all sounds very sweet and great in the beginning, but I can assure you this stuff does not
Yeah,
end
yeah,
well.
it's intimidating, honestly, man. I do find that sort of thing intimidating. But again, every man's character will be revealed in due time, I think. And
Ultimately, if you're really true and honest to your art and what you're doing, you have to always understand that the deal that you're getting, potentially getting, that looks good at that moment, another deal will come anyway
oh
because
yeah,
you're true to your art.
yeah,
Look, if you're true to what you're doing and you're true to your art, there will be people there standing with you.
yeah, yeah. It's better to build a foundation which is firm and actually has some just even one or two reliable patrons, and then you're better able to resist the snares of the devil. I think at that point,
Very, very
which is
important.
what we're aiming for at the moment, anyway. But
It's very important.
yeah, so the last point really fast here, and then we're off to bed. So authority, number 7. Our authority as leaders in a renewal of the arts depends on our exercise of the above principles, the truth of our values, our personal conduct, and the high quality of our work. We need to toughen up and offer apologies only when we respect the interlocutor and recognise a genuine fault. We never apologise.
I
Yeah.
love that.
We
That's
must
brilliant.
we must never offer strategic apologies because it depletes our moral authority and the credibility of our speech. Yeah, very good point. We can
Yeah.
engage in a dialogue even when we see our interlocutor cannot be moved because it is the audience who can be persuaded in private by what he hears. If we set a moral example, then we add ethos to logos and pathos in our presentation.
Mm,
Yeah, that's a great final point there. I mean, this idea of
fantastic.
obviously, apologizing only when you respect, again, is about this Avolian idea of having an aristocratic soul, where you're not going to apologise to a bug man. You know, you have
No,
nothing to be sorry
no,
for. You
no,
know,
no.
you apologise to people you have respect for, and if you've wronged somebody,
Absolutely.
you apologise to them. You know, and you don't make a public spectacle about these things.
Never.
You
You
know,
never. No, no, you never apologize. And you must always work on that level. I think that, you make unapologetic work, you act in an unapologetic way with confidence, with right action. And, these little groveling bugmen types who will try and pull you down to uttering some nonsense, well, yeah, you step over them.
yeah. I think that we've all realised at this point, after 10 years of woke, I think we've realised that if you say sorry for anything, really, they take that as a sign of weakness, and they use that as leverage, and they just tear into you further.
There's no respect given if you're going to apologize, especially because, apologize for what exactly?
Yeah,
For trying to show another way? For,
yeah.
for, for trying to truly fight for a real culture that was, not even happening that long ago before it was completely diverted and thrown off the rails? I mean, geez, come on.
Yeah. I'd apologise for making work that is not up to standard. That's always try and make something better. So if everybody
Of
can do
course.
better, but then there's also you never need to grovel. Because we all come from a place, I think, of we all come from a flawed foundation in a way, where it's like we had to struggle even to get the what we have today. We were not
Absolutely.
we were not set on the right path. We're not Benini, who were put into the fucking he had the greatest facilities available to him, and he was cultivated at every turn. Nowadays, it's more like young people, they're defeated and frustrated at every turn, deliberately so that they end up confused and somewhat disillusioned with everything.
Yes. I mean, it, it's interesting. Of course, we are. It's a funny one, but of course, that we are essentially men amongst the ruins in
Yeah,
that sense.
yeah,
We don't have the incredible institutions that would have backed us in the past. We don't have that amazing ability that would have honed us from, young budding artists or young artisans essentially. We are piecing things together. We're
yeah.
piecing ability together, and that of course is it's a rough around the edges kind of energy, but it's the essence is truly still there, and
Oh,
that's the
absolutely, yeah.
important
But
thing.
there does lie a problem in that with authority again, where you know he says our authority as leaders in the renewal of the arts depends on our exercise of the above principles. So we have to be constantly vigilant of our own flaws and our
Yes,
own
this is it.
our own maybe faulty principles that we've interred from years of
Mm-hmm.
not really
Mm-hmm.
having a strong direction. But I mean, having
Mm-hmm.
having that level of self reflection, is, I think, will take you a long way. It will
It
help
will.
us get through a lot.
It absolutely will. Yeah, certainly.
I think if you have everything handed to you on a plate, you can maybe become complacent, and you can think that you know
Yeah.
the level of self reflection is not. There's always something valid to be had in criticism, and in people saying, well, are you really qualified to speak on this subject? So you think, well, am I really? Like, but then often the person, they're so much less qualified.
Well, that's it. Yeah. That's what you often find. You often find that the people that are testing you on something is like their understanding of it is very very standard,
Yeah,
very
but
pedestrian.
it should help you to reinforce that, and actually go back and, again, I think Mr. Adams, he would agree with the overall vibe should really be constant sort of self reflection,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yes.
also, furious work. You have to do work, but then you also have to reflect on the work, and actually, if you're not going in the right direction, you do have to consciously adjust what you're doing. We are going against a kind of tide. I think that is.
No, you're going against the grain, the standard
Mm.
of today, and you're
There's
doing it
resistance.
without.
There is
There's resistance.
resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't mean what
There's
you're doing
resistance.
is wrong or backward or anything. It just means that you're going against a certain culture that has arisen, and is very, very, afraid of what you're doing, and also it's very prickly when it feels itself threatened. So you should expect that level of resistance. That means
Certainly.
you do have to believe in yourself, and you do have to have a certain like confidence and authority to say we're going this way now. And if we
You
encounter some spears, then we're gonna fight. We're gonna do a bloody good job.
I think the important thing to keep in mind, of course, is I mean, I've had a few attacks on me, and you probably have as well. You know, there that we will come up against resistance, and if we which we plan to do, come further out into the public and actually do exhibitions, then certainly there are going to be sooner or later not particularly nice individuals who will put a bit of heat under us, and I think that's something to be expected. That's going to happen. But I think if you conduct yourself in the right way, with a
Yeah,
sense of professionalism, with what you're doing, and that it's that you're really fighting for culture, then I think you can speak at a high enough level not to get in the weeds with these sorts of people who will attempt to provoke, and will attempt to then provoke and then frame you to perhaps in a certain media light, or
yeah, yeah,
even just a certain group arriving at one of your shows. I mean, this sort of stuff happens. I mean, there are people who won't be happy about a arts movement that's not about equality.
yeah,
You have to
yeah,
understand that. I mean, that even just publicly saying, "Look, we don't believe in equality as an art movement," you're going to immediately be put on the radar as being, well, so if you're not for equality, what are you for? Then you're literally, a fascist. Before you know it, you're having the fascist label thrown on you,
yeah. But I mean
which
that's inevitable anyway. But the point being that Mr. Adams, he understands that if you buckle at that, then
if you
you are
buckle at that,
depleting
yeah,
you're depleting your own moral authority, and I think that
if
is
you,
one thing
yeah,
you can't deny. You have to maintain that, because otherwise, if you're discredited as a figurehead or as a leader, then other
yeah,
people are going to become demoralized by that, and they're not going to
you
know where to
cannot
go.
you cannot buckle at these petty insults and these petty remarks that certain inflammatory people are going to try to get you on, just for making art and another approach to culture. It's you cannot buckle. If you buckle at that point, you'll fucking buckle at anything,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
really. So you have to laugh it off, and it just has to be like a case of, what is this nonsense? Ridicule, and just like, don't even get into debate.
no, no.
Just
There are
like,
some
you're
people who
just a
are never,
clown. Just go
yeah,
away. It's just a case of speaking at a high enough level that these people are really just nothing. That they're just nothing beneath you, really.
yeah. Again, it is part of being spiritually removed from a certain level of discourse and a certain, pettiness. Absolutely, yeah. Which I think is the overall good summary of kind of what he's saying here. It's like elevate yourself in spiritual ways. In a metaphysical sense, you've got to remove yourself from the low and base things,
Yes,
and
you
look
have
up.
to.
Really look up. You see wonderful sculptures and wonderful designs if you look up in London. Um, you just remember to look up in all ways in your life.
Mm, mm. I think it's going to be an exciting road ahead if we can really pull this off, which I have full belief we
Yeah, yeah.
can. Um,
Well,
and I
it's
think
full steam ahead,
I'm
really.
excited for the challenges ahead. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
So we made it through. This is the last paragraph here. So this is how a movement might comport itself very effectively. It says nothing about the principles or the aesthetics outside of the implicit values of comportment. That will be left until later. Well, not so later since we are doing a lot of work, but
Mm,
I say nothing about the advantages and disadvantages of having a membership scheme for the movement, as it is complicated. Well, it's not so complicated, but
mm,
it advantages the movement. Although that is interesting, the idea of supporters. I like the idea of someone kind of having a badge of being a supporter of us in the
mm.
future. I quite like that, and having special privileges for that benefit.
I think those sorts of things are fantastic, and this idea of crowd support for a group is brilliant. I mean, there are so many people that I've come across on Twitter who say, "Look, is there any movement growing? Is there anything happening?" And you see that they're willing to support in any which way that they can. Even if it's just logistics or something. People are hungry to be able to
Yeah,
support
there are so many
that
men
they,
out there with
you
skills,
know,
and they're being put to ill use, in this world, or they're
yeah,
fiendish for something to do.
yeah. It's like, wow, I'd love to be part of another cultural stream. I mean, God, yeah,
So yeah, nothing about the advantages or disadvantages of having a membership scheme as that is complicated. It advantages the movement to have an inner core of an old guard, elites and decision makers as a vanguard, and an outer group of followers, imitating, disseminating, and contributing as and when they can. A thriving movement needs this separation and needs to have a flexible and dynamic structure that allows replacement of personnel within the top cadre, the circulation of elites, as Pareto would put it, as well as rewarding secondary followers and supporters.
yeah.
I
This is,
offer
I mean,
these
he's, yeah.
guidelines. I offer these guidelines for discussion and correction. Well, this is what we're doing. This is the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. No, no,
Yeah,
absolutely. That's what I think we've thoroughly gone through
yeah,
it. But I
yeah.
think his final point there is yeah, it's it's so important to have a structured system in how this
Mm,
works, a hierarchical structured system that has a leadership
yeah,
concept, and it's not just this. Well, it doesn't really matter. Well, I don't know who's making the
yeah,
choice here. I mean, I don't know. Does this work? It has to have a bit of structure,
yeah,
a bit of a hierarchical system in there, to make sure that everything operates correctly. And so yeah, this is vital.
yeah.
It's needed.
Well, as you know, man, I mean, I'm a big fan of the benevolent dictatorship model, where you're not an egomaniac, you're not an arsehole, but you're definitely not democratic at all. I think that
Mm.
that's
No, no,
you
absolutely,
know,
absolutely. I think
and
that's very important.
people respect you more for this. I think people genuinely respect you more for saying no. This is an authoritarian thing. And most people, most creatives actually do operate in that way.
They do, they very
Because
much
that
do.
gets things done. The trains run on time, literally. Like the paintings get
It
done.
gets things done.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's how things generally operate. If you want to actually have action and things moving,
yeah.
otherwise it's all this dithering and headless chicken kind of syndrome of no one knowing their ass from their elbow.
But that's a very interesting point at the end there, by the way, where he says a thriving movement needs the separation and needs to have a flexible and dynamic structure. And I love that. I love the idea of a dynamic and flexible structure. I'm a huge,
Yeah,
huge fan of that.
yeah.
Again, I don't have ranks or whatever. I do separate people by location because I do think it's very important to have people like I recently instigated this idea. If you're in London, you get a special tag, and I obviously organise events for people in London,
Yeah, you organise a number of, I think that's very good. I
and
think
it
that's
is
very good.
based around London at the moment, in a way where you're happy to zip through on the Eurostar to London and
It's so
stuff.
easy for me. It's so
Yeah,
easy for me to get through to London,
and it's just
really.
a wonderful
Yeah.
city. It's just so much culture and so much
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, yeah.
In
It
the
is great.
future, I'm perfectly happy for American faction to form, and I'm sure Mr. Adams' thoughts on this. And again, the Americans, they've got their own approach to art, they've got their own culture. Maybe they're not so. Maybe they will not draw their inspiration from the masters of Europe in the same way that we do, because they have galleries
No.
obviously over there, but again, there's a scene in New York. There's things that are happening within the right in New York, but that's not necessarily
Yeah.
maybe something that's focused on art in the way we are. That's more of a kind of a hipster
No.
thing. Um,
I think I'm super encouraging actually of like an American faction and movement,
mm.
coming together. I'd love to see what they're doing. I'd love to see what they're inspiring on actually.
Well, I don't know
It'd
if it
actually be
really. I don't know if it really exists at the moment. To be honest with you, I mean,
well,
we
yeah.
have
I mean, I
people
don't
in our
know a
group.
huge amount of what's truly
Mm.
going on there, but if such a thing happens, it would be great to see what they're doing and also just riff off ideas. Be awesome.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it is got to accept that we are in a global world, But as you mentioned earlier
Of
with
course.
this, with the symbolists, the symbolists, they were different continents. They were creating work that vibed off each other without really even knowing each other.
Hmm.
And I think that with the internet, it is a lot easier to percolate certain ideas in a global way and have people from literally all over the world who are contributing, but they might not be physically, locally contributing. And that's still,
Well, that's it.
I don't want people to get the impression I denigrate that at all. I think that's tremendously
No.
valuable. This whole thing was built online. You can't.
No, you can't denigrate
It's
that at all. I mean,
infrastructure.
I think
Online is the building blocks, really.
I would actually say it's one of our major strengths. Actually, is that we are. The, okay, it's one of our weaknesses that we're all spread out, but it's also a strength because we have this tight knit network. Actually, of people who well, not everyone, but certainly there are people who are very excited for another culture to bloom, and they will help and support where they can, even if it's just bloody retweeting.
Exactly, exactly. And I value those people. Like, I want to end on really saying that I value everybody that we've got together so much. Really, I think they're just
Hugely.
fantastic, wonderful people. And that's really all. I mean, thanks for listening to the discussion. Any last things you want to say, real fast, man? So we're getting the need for
Only
sleep.
thing I would say is that I have true, unending confidence in this working out. I keep that with me at all times. I'm quite a confident person, and I have absolute belief that this is going to work.
Well, fantastic. I mean, that's will go a very, very long way, I think, and we'll cross the bridges of struggle when we come to them.
Yeah, indeed.
Because I think that this will be. I think that this period will be probably looked at as like the golden, the halcyon days. Of we'll look back with this at this moment with a very wistful look, I think.
I think so too. I think so too.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for chatting as always. It's
Cheers.
been truly wonderful, and thanks for going
It
through
was a
that.
great convo.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
long
enjoyed it, man. Cheers.
long essay with me. Cheers, man. All right, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.